Good. Right, well, good morning, everybody. Here we are for the November in public board meeting. Welcome to anybody who's joining us on the live streaming. Which sound language is going to be available, but it may be not available continuously as we are still waiting a second BSL sign person to join us. Welcome, everybody. We have just one apology for absence, which is from our Ned from Bethan. Otherwise, we are all attending or intending to attend. We have one there who's yet to arrive. A couple of things just by way of introduction, and for the benefit of anybody joining, as I say on all of these occasions, the full accountability for the trust performance rests with the board, but many of the actions for scrutiny and for assurance are delegated to committees, which are 7. The committees do the detailed work. The job of this board meeting is not to repeat that work, but it is to assure ourselves that that work has been done. And to do that, we have minutes of those meetings appended in the papers, and we will also hear from the chairs of those committees as we go through various parts of the meeting. And we have AAA reports which come from all of those committees, alerting us to any issues and providing assurance where assurance has been seen. So our role, as I say, not to repeat the exercises, but it is to assure ourselves that the hard work of the committees has been done. I think that's probably all I need to say by way of introduction. So we'll move on with the agenda, and the first item is the declarations of interest. Does anybody have declarations of interest they wish to inform us of? No, that's excellent, thank you. Next are the minutes of the previous meeting, which was our September board meeting. They were in the board pack, just looking for anybody with any questions or amendments they want to make. Doesn't look like it, so are we content to approve those minutes? Looks like we are. Good, okay, thank you very much. In terms of the matters arising, there was only one matter arising, I believe, which is going to be dealt with later on today in the agenda, and it was a matter relating to avoidable harm, I believe, and SDEX. Anybody got any questions on that? Everybody content with that? Okay, Jason.
We'll mention a bit more, Chairman, on the SDEX later in
yes.
The avoidable harm fight.
Indeed. Yeah. Okay, that's grand. Thank you very much. So then the next item is the chair's report. It says verbal. We have been doing this verbally. We will actually be changing that to a proper written report from January, but it is verbal today. And I've just got a couple of things to mention, or a few things to mention. The first is that this is the last formal board meeting as vice chair for Kevin. So we thank Kevin very much for all of that work, but he's not leaving us, Kevin, familiar territory. But it is the last board meeting as vice chair. But Kevin is staying on, thankfully, for some months yet in a non-exec capacity. And from the 1st of December, Kerry will be assuming the role of interim vice chair, and we will be looking for a full external recruitment program at some point, probably in the spring next year. So thanks to Kerry and thanks to Kevin for taking those 2 roles on. And also, just for an update, we have got or have had a recruitment activity to replace two Neds who are standing down in forthcoming months. That recruitment program is underway, and we would anticipate some interviews taking place during December. So we hope for successful recruitment there. Another thing to mention is that Jason was very successful in persuading the Association of Ambulance Chief Executives to hold their annual conference, which they call the Leadership Forum in Cardiff this year, which I think was a huge success, don't you, Jason? It was widely attended, and I've attended a number of association meetings, chairs meetings and others over the last few weeks, where they continued to report how good that was, how much they enjoyed it, and how well organised it was, and how effective it was. So I think that was grand. We've also, over the last month, had the Chief Exec Roadshows. They happen twice a year, and the execs spend a lot of time going out to 8 venues right across the country, Wales, where we've had good representation from the workforce from all parts, not just emergency services, but all parts of the Welsh Ambulance Service are invited to attend, and they do attend. They were good events. I attended 4 of them, and other Neds attended others all around the country. So they were very good events. And also, just for the record, between the last board meeting and this one, we had a board development session where we were looking at long-term strategy and also being briefed on the developments for LIAS and the New Citizens Voice initiative, which is taking place. So I think that probably covers everything I need to say on the chair's report. If anybody has any questions, I'm happy to answer them. All content? Thank you. Good. So item number 7 is the Chief Executive report. So over to you, Jeff.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll start, as I usually do with this, pulling out a couple of kind of highlight paragraphs from the paper and take the rest of it read. I will start at paragraph 7 if I can on this occasion, which reports the sad death of one of our colleagues since we last met in November. Michelle Perry was a member of staff in our clinical contact centre team. She joined the trust back in 1999, having previously worked for Midwest Fire and Rescue Service. Initially joined us as a 999 call handler, and in 2011 became an MPDS facilitator, moving into the quality team more recently. Michelle sadly died after a short illness, surrounded by her family at the beginning of last month. Was a much loved member of the team in the control and the clinical contact centres, and her funeral takes place tomorrow, which Lee will be attending, representing the team tomorrow. So I think it's just appropriate we just stop for a second and reflect on Michelle's contribution over 2 and a bit decades to the team in the contact centres. So if I can begin to pull out a couple of the salient paragraphs. Paragraph 4 at the top of page 4 of the report talks about the volunteering conferences, 2 very successful volunteer conferences, one held in the north and one in the south, with over 200 volunteers across the 2 events. Also, after the daytime activity, there was an awards event recognising the contribution that our volunteers, not only CFRs, but in the volunteer car service, provide as well. A number of volunteers recognised there. There was some training sessions delivered throughout those days too, and the feedback from those has been exceptionally positively, isn't it? With I think recognition amongst our volunteers of the investment that we've been making in volunteering over the last couple of years, particularly with the strategy, which seeks to improve the significantly improve the reward recognition, but also the training and the role that our volunteers have across the organisation. So that was good to see. We achieved, paragraph 6 reports that we achieved accreditation for the use of ECNS. So this is the clinical assessment tool we use now in the clinical support desks. And we became an accredited centre of excellence there for that as well, which was great to see. And of course, we had people attending the you mentioned the ALF conference, Chairman, earlier, which was the best attended ALF conference ever. Over 450 people attending that here in Wales. We also hosted here in Wales last month the International Academy of Emergency Dispatchers UK Navigator Conference. That was the best ever attended conference for that group as well. And a number of our colleagues picked up awards there, which are touched on in paragraph 6. Going forwards then to paragraph 18, if I can, we've deployed new technology, or begun to deploy new technology into the cabs of our vehicles. So this is the MDT replacement, the mobile data terminal replacement. We were the first major UK ambulance service to deploy the new radio technology in our contact centres, and we've also been the first major UK ambulance service to deploy this new technology in cabs, in the cabs of our vehicles. That rollout is going well, and it's being facilitated by Panasonic, one of the providers, and obviously the rollout will continue for a number of months, but it's good to see that new technology getting into the cabs to replace that aging technology that's been there for many years. Paragraph 45 on page 11 reports on the successful opening and operational use now of the South East Fleet Workshop in Merthyr, which means we're now able to relocate, or have relocated teams, Chris, from Blackweir and Blackwood into those sites, and we'll shortly be completing the decommissioning of those 2 facilities, releasing those from the estate. And for those of you that have seen the pictures or visited Merthyr and also seen particularly Blackweir, it's like night and day. in terms of the facilities available. So it's very, very pleasing that we've been able to deliver that. And paragraph 46, just one more thing on estates. I mean, there's a long list of things in the report about what's going on in estates and the improvement work across the operation of the estate, which is underway, which is great to see. But one of the long-standing issues we've had is Dog Ethli Station in North Wales. Decades worth of attempts to get off of that site and into a new facility. We've recently approved the business case to enable that, and indeed we were sharing site plans for that facility at the recent round of roadshows, particularly in North Wales. So again, it's really good to see one of the long-standing operational estate issues now being closed off. And then the final point, if I can, Chairman, just to draw out from the report, is paragraph 78 on page 17. I draw particular attention to this and the beginning of the second sentence, which talks about 10-second triage. The reason I just draw the board's attention to this is that this is a change nationally across the UK to how we undertake triage at scenes of multiple casualties, particularly at major incidents. It's a recommendation that emerged from the Manchester Arena inquiry, and it will give the board some comfort to recognise that whilst we've still got an assessment of all of those nearly 200 recommendations which are relevant to us as an ambulance service from that public inquiry report, we have already begun to implement those which we can, and this is just one of those. So happy to take any questions on the rest of it.
Good. Any questions for Jason? Okay.
Just a couple of observations, really. I think firstly, this report is really important for us because we spend quite a lot of time actually talking about harm and the challenges we have. But when you read this report, you can see that thread of innovation and progress. And I think it's really important that we celebrate that and actually put a spotlight on it. So I went to the volunteer conference, Jason, that you spoke about in Swansea. I went to one of them, which I thought was really excellent. I took the opportunity to chat to some of the volunteers. And I think in terms of our culture and that direction of travel, I really welcome it. But I thought it was a really excellent conference. And then my other observation was just around palliative care. So in here we've got, the award for the Wish Ambulance and Ed O'Brien's King's Award. And I think it really demonstrates the work that we're doing around palliative care, which can be, challenging in the environment we're working in. So no questions. I just wanted to make those observations, Chair.
Thank you. I'd echo that, actually. I think the volunteers are complete unsung heroes of the service. We're so dependent upon them. There are hundreds of community first responders. There are hundreds of volunteer drivers. I've met a number of those at various events. At the roadshows I sat with some people from the volunteer service. At a previous event, I remember spending some time, one of the awards actually, spending some time with a couple of ladies who had been volunteer drivers for years, and it had become almost a full-time job for them. Completely volunteering, completely unsung heroes of the service. And it's not just the people wanting emergency treatment, but the drivers driving people to routine appointments and so on. It's just a really, really important service. So it's good that we mention it, and it's good that we recognise it. Any other questions? I've got one. I just thought it'd be interesting to hear a little bit more about the police pilot, because I thought that was interesting, in that I think this is clinical support desk for police. I assume it's to do with police being able to get advice if they're first on scene of a major casualty.
That's exactly it. But Lee, you might want to talk about the history of it and what we're seeking to do.
Yeah, twofold. Chair, first is in appreciation that on occasions police officers may be at scene seeking the aid of ambulance and can experience some of the extended wait times that patients experience. And there's also arguably and potentially occasions where police officers are cautious and would an earlier clinical interaction may alleviate some concerns in order to then progress usual policing channels with the individual that they may be with. And so the initial attempt, because we are now in our second attempt here to see if the clinical support desk can add value. The first was quite geographically contained and didn't generate the level of activity that made it worthwhile. And so in the second attempt, that's been enlarged And again, the offer is for officers to be able to connect with a remote clinician for advice. Number one, if it's one of those where officers are unsure, but also number two, if officers are deeply concerned about the patient that they're with, they can get an earlier access to advice. So it's ongoing, and we'll see how it goes.
Any other questions to? No, all content. Good. Okay, thanks very much, Jason. Very comprehensive as always, and as Kerry said, it's a really important paper. This really does give us a feel for the fact that the organisation does an awful lot more than just running around the countryside with blue lights on yellow trucks. Okay, I think the next item is questions from the public, and I do believe we have one this time.
We do, Chair. Thanks very much. And before I pose that question to the board, just to remind our audience that we do very much welcome any questions from the public at these events. So please don't be shy. The next board will be in January, so make sure you're gearing up your questions for that meeting. But we do have questions today from Matthew Terrell. And the question is, please can the service confirm why it doesn't make more use of private providers during times of peak demand on the 999 system? Now, I don't know if Matthew is watching. Hopefully he is, and if not, hopefully he'll pick up the response in our recording. But I'll hand over to Lee Brooks, our Director of Operations, and perhaps he can respond to that.
Thank you, Estelle. A couple of points I'd make in relation to the question. I mean, good and fair question. Of course, we know that service demand can reach high pressure, and we're going to be entering a period of that in the coming months. I would first just start by saying there is use of some private providers. If I just initially talk about the NEPS activity, so the way that contracting works since we've gone through the transition period of the last couple of years is that WAST is the provider of non-emergency patient transport services, but we don't provide all of it ourselves using WAST employees. So we do have contractual arrangements with a number of providers, private providers, to deliver non-emergency patient transport services. In that vein as well, recognising we're going in towards winter, we are the mechanism through which additional capacity can be brought online. Of course, that costs money, but that doesn't mean that the offers are not made. And so we have been talking with our health board partners about how additional NEPS capacity could aid flow, particularly in terms of discharge and getting more patients home. So that's the position in the non-emergency space. In the emergency area, again, we have called on private provision before, predominantly for our urgent care service, and in winters gone by, we have had urgent care support. Whilst I won't go into the detail of what I'm about to say because of where we're at on the process, we are going through a mechanism through which we are renewing the framework arrangement for that additional support should we require it. So, but what is important there is if there is a need for it, the framework will exist for us to call upon private provider partners. Two aspects I just want to close off on this. First, of course, is it's not free. And so the financial position that I'm sure many of the public will now be familiar with in Wales is under a level of constraint that perhaps we've not seen before. And so that is going to feature in the ability for additional capacity. But lastly, I would also say that additional capacity or doing more of the same is not the solution to the issues that we are experiencing. We also know that from some of our experience where we, for example, had military support. That increased the amount of ambulance capacity that we were able to provide. That was good for those patients that received it, but it's still evidence that simply more ambulances is not the solution. And so it's really important that we continue on our journey of designing a model that's fit for the future challenges.
Thanks, Lee. That's really comprehensive. Chair, that's the only question we've had in. So hopefully, Matthew, if you're watching, that was helpful, and I'll hand back to you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you very much, Estelle, and echo the words from Estelle there. We welcome questions. So if anybody has questions for us in January, please do submit them. Okay, we now move to item 8, which is the patient story. And Liam, I think, are you going to introduce this?
Yes, thank you, Chair. So we're bringing a story today which I think is incredibly, as they always are, incredibly powerful. The story is coming from the grandson of a patient and really describes his experience of caring for his grandfather as his grandfather needed self-conveying to hospital and subsequently deteriorated. What I would like to do is just kind of flesh out two things as before we play the story. The first is we've been picking up through our patient engagement and community involvement team increasing concern from members of the community that the delays that we experience in healthcare at the moment, particularly obviously in terms of our crews being able to attend, is leaving a degree of psychological trauma for those that have been caring for somebody, particularly people who might have been on the floor for an extended period or who they are watching deteriorate. And of course, they are incredibly worried about. I think the story really does share what that feels like, and it also shares some of the lasting effect of it, which is why I felt it was a good one for us to review. It has been shared at Quest. We have brought it from Quest into this. It was felt that, as I say, the story was worth us doing that with. I think the thing I'm trying to do with the stories that I just again would like to kind of ask for a little bit of support with is how we use the story through our board meeting. So it's just giving consideration. So I know often we reflect on the story immediately afterwards, and then we move into our committee or our board of business, and it's absolutely present for us individually. But one of the things that was really important in having this story shared with us was the desire that actually he could feel the story resonating through the business. He could feel that actually it was having that kind of impact. So I recognise that we'll all have some reflections after the story that's shared. But I would ask, as we move into the preventing harm and as we move into our MIQPR, that story is present with us in a way that maybe is more explicit than we might have done previously, and that's very much a request that's come. So thank you, Alex.
Close to me, obviously. He's moved here. We moved. My grandfather is quite close to me, obviously. He's moved here. We moved here in about 2 years ago. Just before Christmas, he started having a few little bits of issues with a tight chest. And he thought it was a cold. Over the course of Christmas then, it didn't get any better. He said his chest was getting tight. I called him up on the tablet. Just, "Are you doing, Grant? Are you doing all right?" And they said, "No, I'm not doing too good. Would you mind coming over?" So I went over, and I'm not too good. I'm not too good. He was sat in his chair, and we called 111 because I thought we'd better just get it checked out. And we've been on the phone for about 2-3 hours to 111 that night, being a busy night, I suppose. And the doctor said, well, he was talking to him, as long as he's fine, he can wait to the GP. He went into the bathroom, and the cold air seemed to trigger something. And he came out of the bathroom, having gone to the toilet, and he collapsed. He'd gone completely grey in the face. His words were slurred. I thought he'd had a stroke. So we called 999, and I asked for an ambulance, and I was told I wasn't going to get an ambulance. I explained the symptoms, the grey in the face, the slurring of the words, and it was just, they couldn't do anything. So at that point, I felt helpless, and the immediate reaction was I needed to get him to the hospital as quick as I could. So I knew Neville Hall wouldn't be able to deal with him, so I knew I was going to have to drive to the Grange. So we got him in a coat, got him with this little hat on, got him with his shoes on, put him in the car, managed to put him on my arm and carry him to the car. And I just drove as quick as I could to the hospital. Yeah, we got to the A&E, I parked in the car park, and I said, we got to get from the car park now, we got to get you to the A&E department. And I got out the car, went round, and he just said, I don't think I'm going to be able to make it. And we got him out the car, and I could see he was starting to struggle, so I had him on my arm. And started carrying him across. And he got to the check-in point, and it was at that moment then that he went down. He went down, and he was gone. He wasn't with me anymore. A nurse ran over, and they helped me get him into a wheelchair, and they wheeled him straight in, and I followed behind them. And they rushed him straight into the A&E, and I was stood outside, completely clueless about what was going on. The nurse came in then, I remember, and she went, do you know what's... we need to tell you that your grandfather's gone into cardiac arrest. I thought, if he doesn't pull through, what am I going to tell my nan? And I think that was probably one of the hardest things I've ever had to go through. Yeah, he pulled through. He pulled through. And I was very lucky he pulled through. If I had waited and I hadn't just reacted and got him in that car, he wouldn't be here today. If I had waited for that ambulance, I'd have lost my grandfather. The letter I felt didn't hold any emotion, and it felt very black and white, and I sort of felt like it was we've investigated it, and there's, you know, we can't change the circumstances, was kind of how it sort of worded. I accept the apology. I get it. You know, the NHS is understaffed, they're overworked, and there's a lot more that should be done with the NHS. But the fact is what I've gone through and what my grandfather's gone through people shouldn't have to go through that. Never needed the NHS the whole of his life. Got to 80, 83 at that point, called because we needed him, and they let him down. You know, he's paid that NHS all his life. I do relive seeing the green coat he had on, the feeling I had of holding him, the hat, and I relive that nearly daily in my head.
Very powerful. Very powerful indeed. Comments? Jeff?
Thanks, Chairman. As the video highlighted again, this is a family that Wendy and I met with some months ago. And as you can imagine, you know, as colleagues will have seen from the video, this is, you know, one family where the impact is very raw of our inability to respond in a way which we would want to because of the pressure, you know, because of the pressure around us. The circumstances of this, you know, case, I guess, in a way, ended positively. And I think, you know, the full story of our inability to respond, the detail around that, the length of delay, the number of calls we were holding at the time of a similar category in the area that this incident took place, and the amount of fleet, you know, we'll come on to this in the next paper, but, you know, the extent to which the fleet was unavailable to us would have meant we would have been unable to respond to this particular patient and this call for many hours. It's clear to me the actions of grandson, the family member we've just seen in the video, saved his grandfather's life by driving him to hospital. Because if he'd have had the cardiac arrest in the community, the outcome would have been very different. And I think this is just a really good case that just exemplifies to us all and those, you know, watching online that not only are there patients, but there are others, families, bystanders, and others which are, you know, impacted in a lasting way by the pressure that we're all experiencing across the NHS, and our inability to respond. So I was pleased to meet the family, be able to offer them a personal apology for the failure of the NHS to be able to respond when they needed us in their moment of crisis. We weren't able to do what they needed us to do, but equally it was also, I think, helpful for them to be able to unpack and understand the full circumstances of what went on, and for the grandson we've just heard from to understand the life-saving role he played in it for his grandfather.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, very, very powerful piece there. And as you said it there, if he wasn't a quick thinking himself, and God knows how many others there are across there that would have said, okay, I'll just wait till he seems fine, could have been a different outcome. I just want to kind of go feel when we mentioned about reflecting on this and us thinking about this as the meeting goes on, definitely do think these are the kind of stories that we need to, if we are able to share with the wider system, because he seemed to have understood the pressures we're under, but not everyone is going to be able to appreciate that. And the letter he said, I saw it initially black and white. I think the meeting really helped plug the gap. If the letter had just gone, it would have had probably a different reaction. But I think if we can get a story like this circulated to the wider system for them to see actually it isn't just a one-off, it is something that has a impact not just on the patient, but within their family circle, friends and whatever else. I think that would really, really kind of try and help get the message across. Thanks, Jim.
Yeah, thanks, Trevor. Another hands up.
Yeah, I was just going to say, and I mean, it's heartbreaking, really, isn't it? It's so emotional listening to that story, and really glad that he was able to share that with us. And as powerful as that is, I was just reflecting on some work we've done recently, presenting to EAST, where it's data that's in our MIQPR actually every time, but I hadn't quite really thought about the scale of it. But in 2022, a third of all of the 909 calls were either cancelled by the patients or we weren't able to send. And I don't think I'd quite appreciated that. That's such a powerful story, but that is replicated hundreds and hundreds of times by other families. And so the scale of that just really hit me recently. When you see it and think about it from an individual person's family's perspective, and how often that must be affecting people, it is really heartbreaking.
Yes, thank you, Rachel. Variety of hands going up. So Brendan waiting and Paul waiting. But we go to Kevin and then to Estelle, and then we'll come to the other end of the table. So Kevin.
Thanks, Chair. Just to say, I chaired that meeting of Quest that Liam mentioned, and we did find this quite a powerful, informative story from Stephen, and it's interesting what Rachel has just said there, and we did formally look again at our high-level risks 223 and 224, and note that they were unchanged, which plays into the real challenge all year round, but particularly at this time of year now. So the sort of ongoing effects. So we were able to discuss from Stephen's story the wider impacts on the system, and that's important because we all could get very emotive about it and should have a depth of feeling about it, quite rightly. But we also have to try and inform the service and try and inform the system, and that's our challenge. So, the Quest meeting was really very helpful.
Thanks, Kevin. Estelle?
Thanks, Chair. Just a couple of observations, really. I think just for those watching and who watch the recording, I'm sure I speak for the board when I say none of us take any pride in presiding over the service in that sense. We're all doing our best, and it's awful when we see those stories. Just picking up Rachel's point on the third of calls in 2022. Each one of those calls is a patient and a family and a person. And, you know, the NHS, we often don't like calling it a business. It is a business. It's the ultimate people business. You know, we deal with real people, real patients, real scenarios. And I think that's one of the most powerful stories in terms of bringing to life what we talk about routinely. You know, we talk about this all the time. What can we do about it? We know about the data and the numbers, but actually when you see it brought to life with a real person, and that story sort of soup to nuts from, you know, Grandad not feeling very well through to, you know, collapsing at the desk of ED, it just brings it home to all of us. And that's the type of patient story I think that we need to be focusing on, I think, as Joga said, because sometimes it's easy to have a patient story and we all sort of say the right thing and then move on to the next paper. That is one, I think, that has landed in terms of the reality of what is happening to our patients and what is likely, sadly, to continue to happen for the time being until we can make some movement on some of the really entrenched issues.
Okay, thanks, Estelle. So if we go Brendan next, and then across to Paul.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I think the story very clearly illustrates the difficulty that we have in balancing the risk across the system and for the individual when the system is under such pressure. Of course, the message that we give to patients and callers changed following coroner's prevention of future deaths letters, when tragically people came to harm, when at the inquest the coroner, hearing from the family, agreed that had the advice been bundle the patient into the car and take them to the ED, which is relatively close, and that will give you your best chance of having a good outcome. But this is going to become more of a problem as we head into the winter, and the system is going to be under considerable pressure in Wales. We've already heard the forecast around that. But at the same time, we are still seeing, particularly when we've been doing things such as sending volunteers out to assess calls, a large number of calls that do not require an ambulance, that can be closed down, that probably did not require a 999 call if people had followed alternatives. I think heading into this winter in particular, there probably needs to be another strong message coming out across NHS Wales around the appropriate use of the emergency services and the alternatives that are available to seek clinical advice ahead of ringing 999.
Thanks, Brendan. And Paul.
Brendan picked up my first point really, and that's about the system risk, because we know that there's risk in the system, but if you look at that level of risk, which was probably outweighs the risk of people who had delayed discharge, and I just wondered if we've got the right level of risk across the system when we share a story like that. And the second one was, will we be able to direct Stephen to some sort of support, because he's obviously got a post-traumatic stress issue, and I just wonder whether we have a responsibility, or how can we facilitate some help for Stephen. I know we can't do that for all the families affected, but he's clearly distressed and will be distressed for probably a very, very long time. I just wonder how we're able to direct those individuals to some help when we've heard those stories and met with Jason, etc.
Thanks, Paul. I think Jason's going to come in on that question, so I'll do that now, and then we'll go across to Liam.
Yeah,
That's okay.
thanks, Paul. It's a good point. I mean, it's not usual for us to provide, post-incident well-being or psychological support. There are a small number of cases where we have done it in very, very specific circumstances. But certainly in the meeting with family here, we did discuss, what support is around them and available to them. So that was a topic of conversation in this particular case.
That's great.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jason.
I think if I might just briefly respond on the system issues, it is, lest I forget later on, for the benefit of anybody kind of watching this externally, it is just worth reflecting on the fact that whilst I absolutely agree, Brendan, that we need to continually put the spotlight on the system and do everything we can within the system, I would like members of the public to understand that the system as a whole is very much under that constant spotlight. I mean, Jason and I, transpires happened to have one of our routine meetings with the Minister herself yesterday morning. She's acutely aware of this. I was part of a chair peer group meeting very recently this week with my chair colleagues from around the system, health board chairs and all the other chairs of the various trusts in Wales. This is a topic, very much on their mind within the broader context of the system being under huge stress and under huge strain. It is a matter which I think the whole system, from the Minister herself, the Senate, the NHS executive, the chairs, the peer group chairs, the system is acutely aware, and everybody is really focused on the issues. I think the issue around risk, and the risk which is kind of encapsulated and unseen in the community compared to the risk which is seen in a hospital ward where a patient is not potentially being discharged because there is a concern over what might happen, and balancing those two risks in order to facilitate a discharge and thereby facilitate flow through the hospital. All of these matters are under constant review and constant debate. So it is definitely something which is in the spotlight. That doesn't mean there are easy solutions and there's solutions around, but I would assure anybody watching this program that we play our part in providing illumination in that spotlight with our colleagues right through the system. Liam.
Yeah, just if I may, Chair, just a couple of bits coming back on. So colleagues will note from previous board meetings that we've reported on the challenges that our PTR team have been under for a significant period. And actually, this is a case that kind of really flagged some of the challenge, because the PTR team normally work incredibly closely with families in these quite distressing cases. And so there's quite a strong relationship before we get to the point of issuing correspondence. So we much better understanding about how we frame that letter, and we can personalize it a little bit further. So the assurance to the board is obviously that we have organisationally made a decision, and the PTR team is in the process of being strengthened. So recognising we have high levels of demand on that team for all the reasons described a moment ago, that team will be in a better position to hold on to that strong relationship with the duty of candour and ensure they kind of do get that tailoring in where it's all possible. I think the things that are, it's important, it came out in Kerry's comments to the Chief Executive report. There's an awful lot that is not in our control here, but it is about taking every single opportunity that is in our control. And I think it is fair to say that we, in terms of the things that we can intervene and do, we do get a high degree of support from our system partners. We'd always want more. Of course, we'd always want more, because as long as we've got delays, we will want to go further. But there is some really, really good work that's being led at all levels of the organisation to think about how can we upstream better? How can we make a clinical assessment earlier in the process? How can we prioritise differently to ensure that patients who are genuinely most in need, we get to in some form, or we give them the best advice possible to support them. So I think it's absolutely about the system pressure we bring to bear as a board and as an organisation on our partners to improve handover delays and transfers of care. But it's also about how we continue, as Kerry says, to keep our foot on the pedal of how we continue to transform as a service, expand what we're doing to try and help people further. So I just want to pick those 2 points up.
Thank you. Jason, do you want to?
Yeah, just one if I can, Chairman. I mean, the point about kind of sharing this particular case with system partners is well made. Recently, the Emergency Ambulance Service Committee, so that's the 7 health boards acting as our commissioners for EMS, have started taking patient stories at the East committee meetings. We'll offer this one up for consideration as the next one there.
Good. Okay, thank you. So very moving, and Liam's call was to bear this in mind as we talk through, particularly the 2 items on the agenda: the paper which is just about to come up from Jason on avoidable harm mitigation work, but also as we look at our performance a bit later on in the agenda. So let's make sure we do that, because it keeps it real. It's too easy to deal with statistics in a cold, hard way. This does bring it home to us. The other thought I had, by the way, to mention on terms of volunteers, because we talked about volunteers a little bit earlier and how important they are. And what I forgot to mention, but I'll mention now because I think it's very heartening, both to us here in the room and anybody watching, is that whilst we have, I think, well over 300 community first responders, is that right? About 300? Beyond that? Okay, so as I said, several hundred out there in the community. The really heartening thing is there are an almost equal number, possibly a larger number, actually in the pipeline wanting to join us, the capacity being limited by, you know, the ability to train and to supervise and to provide the support. But it's very heartening to know that within the community of Wales, there are a growing number of people who want to help in a very practical way, and they're able to do that, and building the volunteer force in various ways. And there are subsets of volunteers being developed as well, aren't there, in terms of welfare teams and the virtual ward and all sorts of other things going on. So there is actually quite a lot happening, to pick Liam's point up, that we're looking at all sorts of ways in which we can provide, if not a cure, at least some sort of amelioration of the issues. So thank you very much for that patient story, and I'm sure we'll get an appropriate letter of thanks, Trish and Alex, to the individuals involved. And it's good to hear that story is going to get a wider airing across the system. So let's move on to the next item, which is certainly linked. We have over recent months, and again, this is really for the benefit of anybody just watching from externally, so we know this, we have over recent months received a paper from Jason and the executives in relation to the very high risks of avoidable harm and the inability to attend to calls. We asked at the last board meeting to have a kind of a refresh of that, and we asked the execs to go back and look yet again, picking up Liam's point, to look yet again at all of the things that we might be able to do, however small, which will provide some help and some benefit in these very testing times. So, Jason, you're going to talk through this paper, and I think we're going to give this a considerable amount of airtime today because it is such an important issue. So, Jason, over to you.
Thanks, Chairman. I will give quite a bit of kind of coverage to the breadth of the paper in my kind of introduction to it, and then you know, members of the team might want to contribute beyond that, Chairman, before we kind of get to questions. So, as you say, this paper updates the one which we've been receiving for a number of months now on avoidable harms and the actions we've been taking to mitigate those. It will also form the basis of our response to Welsh Government request around winter planning and preparedness. So the basis of the actions within this paper will form that response. If I can take us first to paragraph 6 on page 5. And the reason I do this, obviously, is that we've discussed on a number of occasions, and indeed one of our principal risks captures this, that the substantial, the main reason that we are unable to respond to patients in the community in a timely way is because of the loss of capacity at emergency departments across Wales, because of the system pressure, you know, the pressure across the rest of the system. And there were commitments or targets made through the Emergency Ambulance Service Committee, which would see the historic trend of handover lost hours reduce down to 12,000 hours by the end of Q3. And of course, we're almost at that point now, end of Q3. However, we are not at the 12,000 hours point. And indeed, it's actually going the other way and increasing, as you can see in the graph below paragraph 6. With total lost hours in October in excess of 23,000 hours, or to put that another way, a quarter of the entire fleet for the month unavailable to us to respond. 25% of the entire emergency fleet for the month of October unavailable to us. And the last sentence in the first dot point of paragraph 6, I think is really important for us to remember. It is that the current operational model and rosters that we have deployed are predicated on an assumption of only 6,000 hours per month being lost. So in other words, as soon as we breach 6,000 hours, or we see less capacity against those rosters produced, or we see more activity than was assumed in the underpinning modelling for those rosters, performance begins to decay. And of course, we're not just slightly over 6,000 hours, we are considerably over the 6,000 hours. And that is the principal reason why we've got very long waits in communities and avoidable harm, sadly death occurring as a result of some of those delays. You'll see in the dot point under that graph that we've just been looking at, what we describe as waits in excess of 4 hours. So there's been a commitment made again to eradicate, i.e. remove any handover delay of 4 hours or more. Of course, 4 hours is too long. 4 hours is too long in any event. It should be 15 minutes. The average is about 2 hours at the minute. But there were nearly 2,000 occasions in October, so last month, where we waited more than 4 hours to hand over a patient across Wales. And of course, some of those instances are far in excess of 4 hours. So there's far too many happening in totality and far too many happening that are very long. I do want to point out at this point, though, of course, and the small graphs underneath that, the bottom paragraph, page 5, do demonstrate this. There has been good improvement in a couple of health board areas, most notably Cardiff, but also latterly Cwmtaf as well. But there are others which remain of significant concern for us, where we haven't seen, regrettably, we haven't seen an improving trend. The bottom of page 6, paragraph 8, I think is just worth drawing out as well. So this waterfall chart here at paragraph 8 seeks to demonstrate visually the beneficial impact of the actions which we have taken, shown against the total losses that we are seeing. And this data here is for October in this graph. It's just a snapshot for October. But if you ran it for any month, it would be largely the same. And what this seeks to show in the positive, so above the 0 line, is the impact in shifts, extra shifts, if you like, as a result of the efficiencies we've been able to deliver. So through re-rostering, through improved attendance rates or reductions in sickness, through improvements in what we've been doing in consult close, so closing more cases remotely without a response, and through recruitment. So those first 4 actions there you see are positive. They're adding capacity into the system. They're things we're doing to be more efficient with the results we've got. But by far, they are outweighed by the loss of capacity we saw in the month. And that's put in paragraph 9 into numbers of shifts. So we were able to be more efficient, if you like, by producing something in the order of 1,200 extra shifts through 1,200 12-hour shifts through 22-23 through the efficiencies that we've delivered. Yet we lost far in excess of that, nearly 2,000 12-hour shifts for that month as a result of the losses in the system around us, as a result of pressure. So as fast as we're moving to be more efficient, those efficiencies are being lost by the system around us, if you like. So we can't pedal fast enough to keep up with the loss of capacity we're experiencing. Paragraph 11 of this paper starts to touch on the things which are in our control. To Liam's point a few moments ago, that we take every opportunity to do what we can to be more efficient, to deploy more resource, to defray more activity in a safe way, to manage patients differently. And consultant close is up on this time compared to last year. It's slightly shy of where we'd want it to be by the end of this year, but nonetheless, it is up. And we've closed something in the order of about 14% of all activity in October by way of consultant closed. Of course, colleagues will remember when we started this journey back in 2018, we were less than half of that in terms of what we closed remotely. So substantial progress has been made over time, but there is much more to do. We've mentioned already the community welfare responders, the APP navigator pilots that have been going on, and the tests of change for the future model. We've got the non-recurrent money to maintain the 100 additional staff this year, and most of those are in post, and where there are vacancies, that funding is being used to support overtime. We've got good improvements come through in attendance rates noted there. We've got a second strategic forward-looking demand and capacity review underway, and the majority of the health board actions to improve handover lost hours, of course, are out with our control. We've got no control over those, but they are managed through the commissioner's ICAP process. And there are fortnightly, I think, meetings with each health board and the commissioning team to monitor and drive progress through those. A couple of other points I just want to draw out, if I can, is that as a result of the slight improvements we saw in the overall picture in handover lost hours through the summer, and because of the particularly strong production that we've had of late, so we're putting out more hours than we ever have before, utilising slightly less overtime, with slightly less people than the same time last year in post, and a significant reduction in abstraction. So we've got more hours produced than we've ever had before. We're over 100% on our DCA rosters pretty much every day. What that's enabling us to do is be able to respond to some unmet need. And Rachel touched on this earlier, Chairman, you know, 33%, a third of all 999 calls last year didn't get a response that otherwise would have done if we'd had the capacity available to respond. So we've started to see some unmet need responded to, and you can see the direct correlation between handover lost hours and incidents responded to in the second graph on page 8. And so what this graph is showing us is that as we started to see in the blue line, handover lost hours increase again, we've seen a decrease in the amber line, the orange line, in the number of incidents that we've responded to. So as pressure builds, we're unable to respond to lower acuity work because we're prioritising the available responses to the sickest patients first. And those patients either elect themselves to cancel their vehicle or make their own way to the emergency department, or we decline to respond through use of the clinical safety plan. So there's that unmet care need which emerges as pressure builds, shown in that graph at the bottom of page 8. The other one, graph that I think is just worth talking to here, and then I will pause after. This is my penultimate point I want to draw out, is the graph at the top of page 9. So this is national benchmarking across the UK, which is emerging from the second demand and capacity review, which is currently underway now. The blue bars are us, and the yellow bars are a sample of other UK ambulance services. And what you can see is by far, the position here in Wales is the worst across the country. So this shows time at hospital as an average across the UK. Recent benchmarking data made available to us in the last couple of months, and you can see by a long, by a country mile, we've got the worst problem. And then the final point I just want to make is, of course, we've looked ahead across to winter and the remainder of this year and into quarter 4. We have done simulation modelling to forecast what's likely to occur because of what we see around activity, system pressure, availability of our staff, and so on. And I just want to draw the board's attention to this modelling. Rachel might want to unpack this and talk about it a bit more in a second. But what this indicates is that we will see RED performance something in the order of the mid-40s in percentage terms as we go through the peak of winter, because of what we expect to see around system pressure, activity, and so on. Now, I just want to kind of balance that by saying that whilst the percentage is off of the target, we are getting to more patients that are categorised as immediately life-threatening than we ever have before. So just by way of example for the board, in the 3 months, August to October 22, we responded to 5,646 patients in 8 minutes. In the 3 months, August to October this year, that was 6,363, so up 717 or 13%. So whilst we're off the 65% target, which of course we need to continue to do everything we can to reach and push towards, the gross number of patients that we're getting to that are categorised as RED is more this year than it was last year. And I think that's just an important feature for us to hold on to in this story. So I'll stop there, Chairman. It's quite a kind of extensive run through of the paper, but I do think it's worth unpacking it, given the significance of the issue for us. I'm happy to take any questions or others want to contribute.
Yeah, I'm sure they will. Thanks, Jason. I'll just add a couple of points, if I may, and then open it up. I think just to follow up on what you're saying about the red calls. Well, I mean, the first thing to say is everything that Jason has said and everything which is contained in this paper, and this is for the benefit of people watching us perhaps externally, because this will be known by everybody around the table. But everything which is in this paper and which has been discussed and will be discussed in the next few moments is well known within the system. These conversations are happening. Jason and I were talking to the minister about it this week. It's happening in all the different forums within the entire system. So I wouldn't want anybody to be watching this thinking that we're sitting on data which is not widely publicised outside of this room. Indeed, it is very widely publicised outside this room, and I think all players within the system are aware of these kind of issues. I think on the reds, I would just make the point that whilst it is undoubtedly true that we're not hitting anywhere near our 65% target for achieving an 8-minute arrival time for reds, when we report we're at 50% or sometimes even sub 50%, people shouldn't believe that the 50% that are not achieved within the 8 minutes are somehow left floundering for hours. It's important also to look at how long it takes us to reach those 50% that don't get met within the 8 minutes, and actually many of those might be met within 9 or 10 minutes. They certainly are not left unresponded, but we're not meeting that target. I don't know whether Liam or I'm not Liam, whether Lee or Jason want to add anything on that particular point in terms of how the graph actually looks in terms of the total red response beyond the 8 minutes.
Yeah, I mean, I think Chair, it's a very fair comment. And when you do look at red 10 minutes, you are edging toward the 60% mark. So you can see that very soon after 8 minutes, arrivals are occurring. And of course, there is something quite blunt in that measure, as I know clinical colleagues will align with, in that success for a patient is not necessarily always measured in the 8 minute. Success for the patient is dependent on their outcome, and there are patients that we get to who still have a successful outcome. Now, of course, we know the timelier the response, the more likely a positive outcome is. But as you say, and I think right to point out, we shouldn't lose sight actually of there are still patients who are having positive outcomes where the arrival is shortly after the 8 minutes.
Good. And of course, the corollary, if that's the right phrase to that, is that whilst we are achieving, I think, some pretty amazing things given the pressures on the reds, we saw the graph here which shows actually what is suffering is the ambers, and where the pressure is greater is the ambers. And that reflects very much the patient story that we saw, which was obviously categorized as a non-red call when it came into the came to the contact center. So it's the ambers which are following. The other couple of points I just thought just worth mentioning is, it is a UK-wide problem. We are worse than elsewhere. It is a UK-wide problem. The other thing which is strange, and nobody seems to have a solution to, is the variation between individual hospitals. We see this huge variation across Wales, and as Jason said, Cardiff has been doing a lot of work to improve handover delays. Other areas are beginning to show some improvements as well, but it is very variable. But that variation is replicated right across the UK. And, there have been conversations which I've been a part of, I'm sure Jason has as well, on a wider footing within sort of the national system. Comes a scratch of heads, frankly, to say, well, why is this? And so many people have been trying to unpick and understand why it is that some hospitals seem to be able to do significantly better than others. And the issues are very complicated. And there are a lot of minds focused on trying to understand that and therefore use that learning to make improvements. The other thing I wanted to mention as well, again, for the benefit of perhaps more outside people watching this, is that it is interesting. I remember, Jason, you saying, I think in one of the road shows, that when you first joined the ambulance service back in the Middle Ages, I think, something like that struck a chord, didn't it? I shouldn't laugh. This is a very serious issue. But there were 6,000. You were experiencing something like 6,000 hours of lost production. Yeah. I mean, that was a good few years ago.
So that was 5 years ago when I joined here. So when I joined our organisation in 2018, we were at 6,000 hours a month lost then, and that was a lot.
Indeed,
a lot compared to the rest of the UK.
Indeed.
And of course now we're something in the order of 4 times that.
Absolutely. So from 6,000 we've gone to sometimes 25,000 or more at that in the worst months. I think what's worth just reflecting on is in the summer when things got a little bit easier because we're not suffering from some of the sort of winter ailments. Lost hours did go down, but they only went down to something like 19,000 hours, something of that nature. So that gives a kind of a feeling as to where the system, the kind of blockages in the whole NHS system in Wales. That you've moved from a kind of a 6,000 hour lost hours norm to almost a normality of 19,000 hours, even at the best time. And of course, now it's beginning to come back up into the 20s or the high 20s. So let's look for questions. So there's Jogger and there's Andy. There's good. Let's just start with Jogger. I think what best thing to do is just go round the table in that sort of sequence. So Jogger and then Hannah. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted also for members of the public to say that during the Finance Performance Committee, it was something I was going to mention at the AAA, but I thought I'd mention it now. We did talk quite a bit about the winter forecast, and it did get a good airing during the committee meeting and the different kind of parameters that were used to do the forecasting, and members and colleagues were given assurances that we're doing everything within our gift to ensure that we can continue to improve the service where possible, especially the kind of getting out to help members of the public. So I just wanted to make sure that that's out there, that it did have a good airing at the committee about the forecast, and we appreciate it's not where we wanted to be, but it is something that we're doing everything we can to try and relieve the pressure as much as possible.
Thanks, Joe. And just leaping, I won't come to you, but I'm just forewarning Kevin that when we come round to you, perhaps you'll be able to say a few words about this topic within Quest, because I think you chaired the last Quest meeting, didn't you? And I'm sure you consider this at some length, but we'll come back. We'll just go around the table. So Hannah.
Yeah, Colin. I am very mindful that these conversations are happening across the NHS in Wales, across the system. One of the things that I know Brendan mentioned earlier and that we continue to speak about as a board is the idea of how together we manage risk within the system. I wondered if you could just give a little bit of assurance around where those conversations are happening. So I'm looking at, for example, this data, and as you say, it's not a surprise to anybody, but of course we focus on the particular elements that are of high impact for us. And I wondered where the opportunities are with our colleagues to sit down and look together at, in a sense, this whatever the most worrying data is that we each have, so that we can start to take a system level view of risk and possibly make decisions that support all of us to lower those elements. And perhaps if there aren't currently the opportunities we'd like for that, I wonder where the opportunities might be for us to do that in that way.
I'd like to give a brief answer to that, and then maybe Jason. So? Okay. Only yesterday, when Jason and I were talking with the Minister, and Nick Wood was there, who's the Deputy Chief Executive of NHS Wales, this was a topic that came up in conversation. It came up in conversation specifically in relation to SDEX and the use of SDEX across that, and the reflection on the fact that there were a lot of clinical issues around that, and doctors in ED making decisions about the use of resources in the hospital. And as a result of that conversation, Nick and others were reminded, and they already have, to take some action to raise that level of conversation in appropriate places. So there are areas where these conversations are taking place. And I think we are a major player in terms of sometimes stimulating that debate, because where we see underperformance with ambulances, it is a symptom of some of these risk issues within the wider area. So I can assure you that both Jason and I take every opportunity, sometimes to the annoyance of others, to raise these issues so that they do get a bit of an airing.
I mean, just to complement that, Chairman, I mean, it's a good point, Hannah, because we would strongly argue that there is unseen risk which we are holding, which is in the community. The calls we can't service, and those patients are undifferentiated largely, and don't have any support around them. That said, some of the things that we've sought to do are not with system partners, are not without risk in themselves. And so there is this balancing act between what we've got in the community, which is largely unseen, which a lot of our effort is about visualizing that risk to colleagues across the system, so those informed choices can be made about where we may take a choice which increases risk in another bit of the system to that which is traditionally there, but trades off that stuff in the community we've got. So there are discussions, certainly in the NHS Leadership Board, in peer group meetings. They are certainly live topics of conversation. And when new interventions are being discussed, certainly from our perspective, we're making the case that the system needs to be equal and balanced across the whole system, not just held in one place. We would argue that part of it is held with us currently.
And I think I've just to add, and I know Liam wants to come in on that point, that this is recognised at the highest level, and the Minister herself has committed to spending some time with Jason and I to have a detailed and in-depth conversation about some of the ways in which we can transform the ambulance service over a period of time to help him on these issues. And as a part of that programme, she's actually going to spend some time with ambulance crews later in December. So these conversations are taking place. Liam, did you want to come in response to these points, and then we'll continue going around?
Because it's the system risk. I spent Tuesday in 2 emergency departments getting a sense of what it felt like their side of the door for those 2 particular hospitals. And next Wednesday, I'm spending time with some GPs from Pan Wales in a particular forum. And I think that the thing that is really challenging for all of us, wherever we sit in the NHS at the moment, is that there is a level of complexity and need in the community that has actually exceeded anything that was expected, planned for 5 years ago. And therefore, at all points in the system, everyone is carrying a much higher level of risk than they've ever carried before. So, if I was sitting with a GP next to me in primary care, they would describe the level of risk that they're trying to handle on a daily basis with the calls coming in, what they're dealing with. Our risk, which we're identifying, and the consequences of our risk, because it's much more obvious to us in the sense of it being a 999 call and everything that flows from that. Within the there isn't an emergency department in Wales that is not stacking at the moment, so they are all boarding to one degree or other. They all are using Fit to Sit in a quite extreme way on occasion. And then you get into the hospital, and then you get to the flow issues that we all recognise, which is the building of social care capacity, rehabilitative capacity that enables people to come out the other end. I speak every month, I speak through the month to my colleagues, but every month in the peer network, this is a feature of the conversation. And each month I am told how many beds in each of their hospitals have patients who should have been discharged and who should be cared for at home, and what that's doing for the risk there. So I think I absolutely am in that space. We have got to keep promoting the level of risk we are carrying, the impact of what we are carrying, but it's making sure we do it in a way that is cognitive of that there isn't I don't think there is a clinician anywhere in the system at the moment that isn't carrying significant risk in their own right as part of their organisation, and how we navigate that path in a way that is in partnership and collaborative is critical to safe care. If we go the wrong side of the line and it gets attritional, we will cause more harm because we haven't got the right relationships, and it's really important we hold on to that.
Yes, and that sort of need for a partnership approach is very much where I was coming from in my question. So, diolch yn fawr.
Okay, thank you, Hannah. So just running through them. Hannah, do you want to come in here?
Yeah, so mine's in relation to item 13 on the paper. Jason did kind of touch upon install some of my thunder, where I just want to delve a little bit deeper on that, because I think there is that second graph where it illustrates what happens if we see worsening in terms of our handover delays and our inability then to respond. The reality is the more we can't respond, the more patients will arrive at the front door of ED under their own steam. And so when you look at, our average see and treat rate when we send an ambulance is around 60 to 65%. If we send an AP, it's between 25 to 35%. So if we are able to get a resource to people, we can defray much of the activity arriving at the front door of the ED. If we don't get to people, then essentially the EDs get virtually all that activity as people make their own way, which in turn then perpetuates the problem, worsens the situations, creates more pressure at the front door, and delays our handovers. So having some intervention that prevents us from those handovers is actually, in turn will flip the opposite and self-perpetuate our ability to get some movement across the system. So I really think and we'll see as we get to the MRQPR, where you see that the bit that Rachel touched upon about sheer volume of cancellations will all take place in that first 15 minutes. Really is one of the things that then drives that worsening of the situation.
Thanks, Andy. And to put it into context, I just made a note actually down here that over the last 3 months, there were over 29,000 calls to the 999s where we were not able to give a response. And so a very large number of those would fall into that category, Andrew, the people who potentially would have been given advice to jump in a car or a taxi and go to A&E, which might not have been necessary.
Yep.
But obviously also within that group were the case study that we saw earlier. So bear in mind all of these variations. So just one at a time. And yes, Andrew.
Thank you, Chair. And I think I'd just like to turn attention to Jason's final paragraph 21 about the impact on our staff. And I think it links back to what we heard from Stephen earlier and that lived experience. Most definitely during the roadshows over the last couple of weeks, hearing from our staff again about their concern about not being able to provide the right service to patients when they most need them, the impact of handover delays and the reducing our overruns, their inability to plan their lives. You know, we are doing significant work, Lee and his team, around trying to really focus on that, but we know as pressure increases, it becomes more challenging. And you know, these staff are members of the community and it's impacting on their families. So I do think it's important to reflect on that as well, that this isn't just an isolated issue. Thank you.
Thanks very much. It's interesting, isn't it, that we are having an undertake-up, if that's the right expression, of overtime opportunity. And you wonder whether there is a link between the fact that whilst people would desire to take overtime opportunities, particularly run into Christmas, people perhaps wanting to earn some extra money, it's a good opportunity. Actually, they're choosing not to. And we're having unfilled overtime opportunities. So that may be a link in terms of morale and attitude. Moving around, so yes, Lee.
Thank you, Chair. So just to start off, of course, I mean, whilst we've talked about are there discussions taking place with our colleagues? Yes. Is there lots of effort to try and to make a change? Yes. We do have to come back to what is actually making a tangible difference, because we can put as much effort into solutions as we want. If they aren't making a difference, there has to be a legitimate question asked about where that effort should be concentrated, and we have to be looking for big effect in order to deal with this. The other point for me is that this paper is not a catastrophization of what's happening, and in response, we saw our incident declaration at the back end of last month, which of course was very well reported publicly, which is the absolute this is real, this is happening, and we are already getting to a point where we have not had an ambulance to send to patients. And that's not just patients in the amber category. We're talking about very, very sick patients without a resource to be able to send to them. It's interesting how the effect of an incident declaration plays out. For me, and this will correlate to some of our risk, so this is preempted to some of our risk discussion later on, we are not still, in my opinion, seeing sufficient reaction within the system to an incident declaration. So the trust declares an incident and we do not see the release of ambulance assets in order to try and recover the community risk issue that we're holding. And that is a real problem for us and more broadly. On the 4-hour delays or handover backstop, it is really good to see some health boards doing well. And on this front, Cardiff and the Vale, we know, declared an incident just this month. But I have to commend Cardiff and the Vale for the efforts that they took to limit the impact of that upon us as the ambulance service and to still see a healthy ambulance turnaround at the emergency department. In response to our declaration at the back end of last month in Swansea Bay, they have commenced a 12-hour backstop, which seems somewhat delayed given that the 4-hour backstop was meant to have been achieved, I think, originally
September 22.
So to have deployed a 12-hour backstop in November 23 does concern me, because that seems incredibly delayed and questions for me the accountability mechanism for target attainment when they have been set. I'm pleased that we've started, and already Swansea Bay is taking action to reduce that to 10 hours. But by current standard, that's already 6 hours too long. And of course, that should be reducing even further. And then my last point, I just want to touch on, because we will, I'm sure, later talk about immediate release. Andy, again, alluding to that Amber 1 chart. Let's just remind ourselves, Amber 1 are heart attacks, stroke. These are not low acuity calls. These are high acuity patients who need a timely response. we are, and so we are not responding to enough of those patients. That is huge risk, and I believe is a greater risk than the red performance position, particularly when we know now going into winter, those patients are going to wait longer for help, and we are going to have to call upon the immediate release direction mechanism for ambulances to be released from emergency departments. Now, whilst we were in dialogue with health board colleagues around some of the data, there is an undeniable trend that features here, which is there is not the gravitas of commitment to releasing ambulances to attend to heart attacks and strokes in the community when there isn't an ambulance to send, and that plays out in the data. And so I'm still not quite sure how we are able to knit this together off the patient story. Highly suspect from listening to that was an amber call. And so it plays out in exactly that situation where we may then seek the release of an ambulance from the emergency department to attend to that patient, but be told that that ambulance cannot be released, which by now in that amber category needs to have shifted, and going into winter really with it not shifting as it has for red, for me is a worry.
Thanks, Lee. One of the things we're asked to do in the recommendations apart from the report is to consider whether there are further actions available. And that issue around immediate release is maybe one that we should be asking for more information on in coming months, because I'm sure everybody's seen the data, and I don't know if anybody can put it up quickly. I know it's in the MI QPR section later on, but there is a huge variations between the reds and the ambers. So the red immediate releases were by and large being complied with. The amber releases by and large were not. It wasn't just a small variation, there was a huge variation, and it gave the impression that hospitals were going, no, it's only amber, we don't have to worry about it. I don't know whether that's true or not, but there is a huge variation between the two. So maybe we can hold that point and come back to it when we do MIPQ, and maybe that could be one of the issues that we might just ask for more information on. A few hands again, I'll come back in that direction in a moment. So just, I think, Rachel, you shot up first.
Well, I'm just doing on the way round.
Oh, in that case, just hold the point. Yes. I think these are follow-ups to Liam. So Brendan and Kerry.
Yeah, it's actually in follow-up to what you were saying about what is the more that we can do. I think, and we've started doing this work, but some of the data analysis we could be taking to another level. The problem, as Lee was referring to around the amber release, is that it does include people with heart attacks, but the call that we will receive is chest pain. And I think one of the difficulties that colleagues at ED face is that they know only about 5% of our chest pains actually turn out to be STEMIs. And they are faced with patients actually self-presenting with heart attacks at ED these days, which is absolutely chaotic. I think that the work that the clinical team have been doing in association with colleagues in informatics in particular, around which of those chest pains are actually most at risk of suffering a heart attack, which of those shortness of breaths are actually the cases that require an immediate intervention. We've only had the EPCR in this year, and it's that data that is giving us so much more of this rich information. As we manage to hone that down, we maybe will be subcategorizing some of these areas. There will be greater intelligence behind what are the calls that we absolutely need an immediate release for. So in terms of what more can we do, I think this is an area that clearly we will be progressing over the next year. We're already leading in some of this work, but there's more to be done there. The other issue that is really striking from the report is the national data. And I know that there are issues around demographics, age of the population, the health of the population, but there are areas in England that we compare with, and yet we are consistently worse in terms of the time at hospital. And you do have to ask, well, what are the differences between Wales and England that are driving some of this. I know the frustration with clinical colleagues in the hospital does come back to the number of patients that are in hospital that could be in alternative accommodation with or without extra support. And this clearly seems to be one of the drivers, and it is going to be a question of going across the health and social care system in Wales. We certainly don't want to be going back to the days of general elections and politicians pointing out that Offa's Dyke is the difference between life and death. So we have to be continually pushing to ensure that we at least compare with some of our English benchmarking areas.
Thanks, Brendan. We are on our route around the table for general comments on the paper in its entirety, but just to catch up with a couple of people who I think want to come in on Lee's point on the issues around AMBER and other releases. So Brendan, thank you very much. Kerry next, and then Martin.
Thank you, Chair. So I did want to come in on the AMBER ones and the immediate release. I mean, in the annex, it says that there were 311 declined in October, I believe, which is start. This report is always a hard read, and actually, I think it's really important that we have the transparency and the openness and the discussion here. But from when this report started coming to board, it doesn't feel to me that much has changed, despite significant efforts by the teams and the staff here. So I think that's a concern. But just thinking about what Brendan, what you were saying, and of course it's the outcome that's important here, isn't it? Because of those 311 people, because they are people, if 280 were okay, it's still not good for the remainder. So for me, the question is there anything we can do at a point in time, which actually, and I appreciate it's going to be challenging and it's going to change, but is there anything we can do at a moment in time to look at where those immediate releases are declined and what is it that we're declining? I don't even know whether that's possible, but it could be quite impactful. And I think it relates to Hannah's point around risk across the system. Maybe there's something in messaging. And then my other point was really, as we're embarking, on what people are saying is going to be extremely difficult winter, what is our approach in terms of messaging? So appreciate you might want to take that later, yeah. Chair.
Okay, thanks. So Jason, I think you want to come in.
Yeah, so a couple of points if I can in response to Kerry's questions there, and I'll bring Lee in. So on the last point about system messaging, we are imminently going to be sharing a stakeholder briefing note with key stakeholders across the system, health partners, but also with local and national politicians, and we'll be engaging them to help us message communities. So that is imminent. I've got the first draft of it late last night, which I need to review at some point today. So that will probably go out next week. On the immediate releases, so there is a national protocol around immediate release and escalation, which I'll bring Lee in on to describe in a second. We share weekly with chief executives and with chief operating officers a compliance report broken down by health board. And in that compliance data, we share with them the specifics of cases, not all the cases, but a sample of the cases. So it's broken down from an AMBER 1, and we say it's this and it's that. So there's a bit more detail there offered. And you're right, Kerry. I mean, we have seen, to be fair to colleagues, significant improvement in compliance around REDs, but there is drifting, very, very variable compliance around AMBERs. And it is the next area for us to start to attack. But we certainly share on a weekly basis with senior leaders in health boards compliance report, which breaks it down by site. So it's transparent in that regard. Lee, do you just want to talk briefly about the kind of real-time escalation that's there?
Yeah. I mean, let me start also by saying we don't always get it right ourselves. And I'm quite happy to admit that we don't always get it right. And that's one of the purposes of the audit, is to check our application and how we are making the corrections, as well as the health board response to those. So we don't always get it right, but largely the compliance is enough to be content with the trends that we are seeing in the data. So that's definitely what I would say. There is a on-duty escalation from control room to ODU, and therefore from ODU into the health board, and they will engage at site management level to understand why releases are not occurring and what the health board may be able to do in response. So there is an escalation, and checking for the escalation is part of our compliance check as well.
Thanks, Lee. Kevin, I know wants to come in, but just Martin, I think next.
Yeah, I just want to build on something Brendan said. I mean, we've had this conversation so many times, I have to. In fact, I was reluctant to make any comment at all on because of that. But I think, given something Brendan said, it sort of triggered a view in my head, and that's the additional data we got today was on the national assistance position. And we've reflected a few times on why is it England are better than us when it comes to emergency services and responses. Well, my view, and it is a view, it isn't a fact, it's a view that it's taken more seriously in England as an issue. It's not acceptable to be in the position we're in Wales. It wouldn't be acceptable in England. People would lose jobs. That's what would happen. And I think, I'm not saying that's what should happen here, because I think when you look at WAST, what are WAST doing? I think we're doing everything we possibly can, including shouting at the system, which comes back to something that's already been said. I think we accept the leadership, and we shouldn't. I think there's poor leadership, there's poor coordination. They just say, go away, trust, sort this out amongst yourselves, without providing, I think, the leadership. I mean, Cardiff aside, everybody should be like Cardiff. Why aren't they? I don't know. What are Cardiff doing? I don't know. But they're taking it seriously, and they've done whatever they need to do to achieve whatever they need to achieve to be able to be. We said a few times today how good Cardiff are, and that everybody's going to learn from Cardiff. No, they haven't. And I just think we put up with it, actually, and we shouldn't. We should shout at the minister and others, because it's actually I think they have a responsibility here to lead and prioritize and say, this is so important. This is, emergencies first. It was interesting when we had the patient story earlier, that when he looked for somebody to point the finger at, he pointed at the ambulance service. That's interesting in itself, isn't it? Actually, he's blaming, if you like, the ambulance service for letting him down. Well, it's the NHS that's let him down. We're part of it. I accept that. And that, first protocol. And the other thing we've talked about is who's holding the risks. I know, Paul will know, others of us who've worked in hospitals. When you run hospitals, the risks are the patient in your hospital, not the patients in the community. Don't think like that. We don't think like that. Yet, if that mindset changed and said, okay, the people in the community are just as much our responsibility as the ones we got in our beds, then maybe the mindset might start to shift. And again, this comes back to clinical leadership, which I've banged on about a few times over the years when we've had this conversation before. And maybe we just need more clinical leadership and prioritization within the system. But I've said my bit, Chairman. So I'm not sure.
No, thanks, Mark. It's very interesting that risk and responsibility issue, because Walsall Hospital was doing very well in the UK, and senior staff from Walsall were brought into a meeting with the chairs months and months and months ago to share their experience along with Cardiff on exactly the topic you were mentioning. Share the learning. And one of the messages they gave to the chairs of the hospital trust here in Wales was that they were very much taking that view that the patients in the community were just as much their responsibility as the patients in the hospital. And they were putting their focus broadly rather than just narrowly within the confines of their building. I'm just conscious of time. We're giving this a lot of time, and we should, because it is probably the most important paper in our agenda. So just so people are aware of that, I'm keeping an eye on time, but we are going to give this sufficient area. We will go all the way around. But I know, Jason, you wanted to come in, and I think also Kevin wanted to come in on this specific issue, and then we'll go back to the more general issues on the paper before we finish.
I think Paul does as well.
Oh, and Paul, okay, fine.
So, just to respond to Martin's points around kind of leadership, I'll just draw the board's attention to a recent paper that the Association of Ambulance Chief Execs published, looking back across the last 10 years on this particular issue. What that highlighted, as we know, is a general decay in the situation across the UK, not just here, but across the UK over the last decade. So, year on year, the problem has got more and more significant or stark. But what they also did in that report was drew on the themes which emerge from areas of best practice. So you mentioned Warsaw, Bristol's another one in England. The Northwest is a region that we've drawn from before. So we've had we've invited colleagues from the Northwest into the Emergency Ambulance Service Committee and other places to share their approach. So there are a couple of, a number of, I guess, best practice areas across the border in England where the themes of those have been drawn together. And one of them is a consistent theme around system leadership, grip, focus, ownership, and system leadership is a clear theme that emerges from that report.
Okay, Kevin, we're going to come to you for the generality of comments and requests. Did you want to come back specifically on the immediate release?
Most of what I was going to say has been said. There are a couple of things specifically on that, if I may. I think leadership, ownership, and followership that comes from leadership and ownership are the key things that I've seen when I've spoken to people in Cardiff of the Vale. 4 hours is not a target. 4 hours is still a danger zone for many patients. We shouldn't lose track of that ever and normalise it. Specifically on Quest 223 and 224, the two high risks that we debate every single time. One of the challenges I've put forward is, if we have done as an organisation everything we possibly can, why are they still 5 by 525? And the answer is that unknown risk. We are just simply not comfortable with that unknown risk out there. And so it remains, they remain, sorry, the two of them. And the last thing I'd say is I'm not seeing any progress in alleviating that learned helplessness that was a Wales-wide report on the NHS last year. I see no direction of travel positively from that. And I think, to Martin's point, that is part of the problem in the Welsh context. And the last thing I'd say is every health board in Wales has a responsibility for the population at risk in the communities that they are geographically designed to serve. So that's, I don't know if it's statute, but it is certainly a responsibility that lies there. And commissioning this organisation is part of that. So there's a lot of really important contextual issues there that we shouldn't forget. But colleagues have said all the other stuff, so I'm very grateful.
Thank you, Kevin. So coming back to, I can't come to you a minute if I may, Damon, coming to Paul.
Yeah, I was just going to pick up the issue Martin raised, because when I was in Cardiff, you've got to remember Cardiff is different to everywhere else because it's got a regional responsibility as well. So when you think, well, how are Cardiff doing it? Because actually they've got a much more difficult and complex organisation to run, particularly at UHW. It hasn't got the capacity outside UHW. So there's something going on in Cardiff. And the one thing when I was there, and it was a long time ago, we invested in senior decision makers, clinical decision makers at the ED. So the number of consultants that were there was important because they would turn around patients. So it'd be interesting to see how many patients actually go in, are dealt with, assessed in ED in Cardiff, and then are discharged from ED. Because I suspect that in lots of other hospitals, the senior clinical leadership at consultant level, decision-making level is less. And I suspect that there's junior doctors admitting patients that probably don't need admission. So it's much more complex. But it was interesting in Cardiff, we spent a lot of time investing in the ED consultant cover and also recognising there's only one ED in Cardiff. There's no many injuries apart from Barry, which doesn't operate that often. And yet the other health boards have got minor injuries units and other areas where patients can go. So there is something different about Cardiff. It might be about leadership in terms of management, but I suspect it's about clinical capacity and clinical leadership at the front door.
Thanks, Paul. So Dan, we'll come to you, and then what we'll do, we'll close this subsection of the sort of immediate release discussions, and we'll just carry on around the table and see if there are any more general comments around mitigating harm before we move on. Damon.
It's just a reflection on the release side of things. I just wonder whether, you know, the narrative possibly needs to be altered in respect of amber ones, and maybe you should have, you know, red ones and red twos in respect of the release side of things, because there's something in that term of amber, whereas the red does sort of prick your ears up a little bit harder, doesn't it? And as there's not the acute knowledge and focus on us in the wider health economy, actually just look, we've got another red, we need to get released.
Yeah,
I don't know. Just
I mean, what struck me reading the paper, because I hadn't realised this, was that of the 45,000, I think, calls that come in on any 1 month, of which some 29,000 maybe, you know, don't really get responded to. There are only about 2,200 which were reds, something like that, which is actually a very small proportion. So actually, when you're kind of skimming the top, the reds actually relate to a very small proportion of the total call. So that amber is a very large, it's a very broad church. Of course, thank you. Right, so I'm not sure where we've got to, Rachel. So we're going back to the generality of the paper in front of us in terms of mitigating harms. So let's broaden the discussion beyond the immediate release, which is an important issue, but there are many others.
Yeah, really, I was just going to bring us to the thought that obviously a lot of this is felt very strongly in the here and now. We're looking at winter, you know, kind of immediate short term, but actually, you know, we've all talked about in other agenda items, other points, that we have got to do something very different in order to play our part to transform this system. So I was just going to kind of relay that we had a first kind of discussion at EASC on earlier in the week, where we were allotted a period of time to just talk through that kind of longer term strategy again with our commissioners. It was only 20 minutes that we were allotted. It's not a lot of time to kind of get some key messages across, but a couple of chief executives or a couple of representatives there were immediately very excited. And in fact, as it happened, we had our regular exec catch up with Betsy yesterday, and we continued that conversation, and they are in the new chief executive, they're in the same space of we need to create time together to look at the future. We can't just be about, you know, what's it going to be like tomorrow and next week and, you know, over the Christmas period. So I think coming back to the discussions we've had about, you know, how we engage with the system, how we, you know, up the ante a little bit on really telling the system what we can offer, as well as listening to them in terms of, you know, things that they're able to offer differently. So just thought I'd put that in there as a kind of, you know, we're still on that journey as well of trying to look a little bit further ahead at, you know, what are the transformational changes that will make the difference to some of this.
Okay, that's interesting, of course, because Betsy's got a brand new chief exec.
Yes.
They've been through a period of great difficulty.
Yeah.
They're a bit of an outlier in terms of their performance at the moment, and they've got a lot of change to think about. So going round to, did you want to add anything more, Kevin, in terms of thanks for that? Anybody from this side of the table wanting to come back in? Brendan, just.
Yeah, just really highlighting what Martin raised around the national data comparison and whether this was being given a higher priority in England. Now, obviously, with my work in England, I see some of the differences. I would say undoubtedly it is coming under greater scrutiny. You know, part of this is because the ICS's, ACB's relatively new, and one of the areas that's been really scrutinised is their unscheduled care, because of course now they're in a position to manage the flow of patients going across health and social care. They also manage primary care in a different way than we do in Wales. And of course that is then backed up with a different inspection regime through CQC, which has different options compared to the inspection regime in Wales. And the third point, coming back to the clinical leadership, is England for many years has had very strong and visible senior clinical leaders with unscheduled care as their remit. I know that we have 6 goals. I don't necessarily see the same clinical leadership and engagement through that programme that I see in England.
Okay, I think, a final point then, I think, from Liam, and then we're going to draw this item to a close and move on.
Yeah, it's just it's a comment that Martin made, and then I'm just listening to Brendan. Bearing in mind, I worked for pretty much all of my career in England in various guises. I've been around all the ACOs and the ICBs and ICSs in the south in one form or another. And the challenge that if we were being strategic, that plays into Rachel's point, is that the way in which the NHS is set up in Wales is set up around population health. And internationally, that is absolutely the right thing to do. All of the evidence says that is exactly the right thing to do. And the ability for a single board to have the opportunity to divert resources, prioritize resources to the needs of the population, and not have to navigate other organisations should be hugely empowering and enabling. And that isn't what I have witnessed since I've been here. I have not witnessed population health. I've watched service management, be that a hospital or a community or a primary care contract, whatever bit you want to pick out of. And what for me has been fascinating, even in the time that I have been here, is witnessing how rapidly integrated care boards in England are moving into that population health space, how they are taking their statutory duties of independent organisations with several regulators, really forceful, powerful regulators, and how they are navigating that to enable the right allocation of resources into the right place with the right priorities, and doing that in a shared way. So the evidence base for our construct is correct, and if you looked at North America and what they've done around ACOs, absolutely is correct. But our implementation is not in line with what the evidence says. That comes back to senior leadership. It comes back to really good data, really good understanding of finances and accountability for finances, and it comes down to risk, not just about the way we're describing it today, which is critical, and about today and tomorrow's risk and the harm that is occurring, but it is also about how you incentivize through a risk framework investment into the right places. So how do you shift left? The reason that ACOs make money in North America through insurance, etc., is they have 10-year plans in which they are expecting to move resources. Year 1 to 5, they make no money. Year 5 to 10, they make no money, because they've made the shift and they've got the improvement that they're seeking. So there's something in there that is, that's well beyond our remit, but it does. For me, that's a dissonance between the environment, regulatory, the legal, political framework in which we're operating, and the delivery not really coming together.
Thanks, Liam. Okay, look, what we'll do, let's draw this particular part of the meeting to a close. It's been a good discussion. I've actually got a couple of outputs here. I'm sure in the minutes we'll pick these up. But one of the things we're specifically asked to do was to consider whether or not there are further actions that we can take. We are clearly limited, but there are a couple of things. One is about just better understanding of the ambers. So perhaps in future board meetings and maybe in board development, who knows, we will spend some time thinking about how we could lever a better response with the ambers, and maybe segregate out some of those ambers which really do need that immediate release, as opposed to some of the ambers where perhaps it's not quite so vital. So there's some work to be done on that because of that huge disparity within the hospitals between the red release, which is broadly agreed, and the amber release, which is broadly not. So I think there's something we can do about that. I think there's also something, Rachel, which maybe you could provide us with a bit more feedback as time goes by about these discussions with the chief execs, because it does sound as though that's an opportunity to really begin to flesh out some of our longer term strategy. And actually, in the sense, taking Liam's point about the long term, if we can't do an awful lot about the immediacy, actually, if we can encourage the system to embrace our plans for a transformation of ambulance service, that's going to help us. So if you've had positive conversations with the new chief executive, Betsy, it'd be really good to hear a little bit more about positive conversations with chief executives elsewhere, because actually we are never going to be able to transform in the way that we would like to without the support and cooperation of the wider system. So actually, for us as an organisation and as a board, hearing a little bit more about those sorts of conversations and encouraging and supporting those conversations will be really helpful. And then in terms of understanding, we can't do anything about it, but I thought that Paul's point about the use of EDs. Liam, you're spending some time in ED departments. It will be very interesting actually just to hear a little bit as time goes on as to whether there is a big difference between the sort of the consultant ratio, I suppose, one for a better expression, within EDs around the country, and whether that around Wales, whether that actually is something that makes a big difference. We can't influence it, but it would be influence, and I suppose we can influence through discussion in a quiet and gentle way over time. If we understand better some of the potential issues, we can, in those conversations you're having, pass that on. So I think there are some things we can do. Thank you for that. We're due for a break at 11:15. We're actually slightly over that, so let's take the break now. We're slightly running over in terms of agenda items, but I think we'll catch up because many of the agenda items later on are slightly less significant. That will be easier to deal with. So it's 20 past 11. Shall we meet back here at 25 to 15 minutes? Let's give ourselves 15 minutes to tea break and coffee break. Meet back here at 25 minutes to 12. Thank you. So we're going to try and get back on track in terms of timing, which I think we can probably do. So the next item is over to Trish, which is Risk Management Corporate Risk Register.
Thanks very much, Chair. So you've got the principal risk register there as well as the front cover. And I think the important thing is that this is the embodiment of those risks, the formal embodiment of them, so that the paper that went before, particularly around 223 and 224, is really important from this perspective, because very rarely do you get such rich discussion on a risk register. And I think having that paper beforehand, and also the way we actually look at these principal risks, particularly the higher rated risks, when we're setting the agenda and we're actually going through the meeting, does bring them to life, even though this is the formal embodiment of it, if that makes sense. So, and just going back to how that previous paper started, which was the escalation of these risks by the chairs of Quest and Finance and Performance Committee and People and Culture, to get to the point where we had this paper here, and we have this paper and we have this rich discussion. So I think the link of the two of them works really well. So I hadn't anticipated going through risk 223 and 224, because we've just spent a huge amount of time talking about those. They've been completely updated. They're up to date as of November. Of course, Quest spent a lot of time on them. They also go through the other committees as well. So I wasn't actually going to spend any more time on that. You can see there's some new actions, operational, tactical, strategic actions in that paper as well. On risk 160, which is sickness management, and 201, which is a reputation audit, the other two high-rated risks, both rated 20. They were again the subject of discussion at the People and Culture Committee that took place last week. And for 201, the reputation audit in particular, we did spend some time talking about, the consequence rating being at 5 and why it was at 5, meaning that it is now a 20, and the difficulty of reducing that as well. And I'm sure Paul and Estelle will talk to that as well. These risks are reviewed monthly because of their scoring. And so while those scores remain the same, it's really not for lack of that ongoing dialogue and eyes on this, not just at committees, but certainly through the executives' leadership as well, and the assistant director's leadership team. So I think what you'll probably see at the next meeting is a little bit of movement in some risks, but unlikely to be any movement in those for a while, particularly as these principal high risks don't move very quickly between meetings either. I think one thing to draw your attention to in this paper certainly is the risk 199, which is the failure to embed a positive health and safety culture. It's now reached its target score, and we also had some really good discussion on that in People and Culture Committee. Huge amount of work that's been done by the health and safety team over the last 18 months, and you'll see in the paper at paragraph 11 and in the BAF the rationale for that, and so you'll see the huge amount of work that's been done. And again, Liam and Paul will no doubt expand on that. So I'll leave it there, Chair, just to say that all of the other risks that are there, the other 15 risks in that list, have all been discussed at the committees that have taken place since the September board.
Good. Thanks very much, Trish. So comprehensive paper, which I'm sure we've all read, which we can take as read. We're asked to consider it. We note the change in 199 particularly, and the lack of movement in the two principal risks for reasons that we well understand. Are there any other questions or comments anybody wishes to make or to draw out? Yes.
I just wanted to make a comment actually on the maturity of this, and actually it's really reassuring. Paul said it, I think, at the last meeting, to be able to go through this and see what's been added, and it's comprehensive. So I think for us that's really reassuring, and also really good to see risk 199 coming off. So thank you.
Any other comments? So I think in terms of what we've been asked to do, to consider and discuss the content, particularly with the length of time we spent in the last paper on the two principal 25 risks, we've really discharged that obligation. We're receiving the assurances, we're noting that de-escalation of 199, and we know the ratings of mitigation. So if everyone's content with that, we'll take that as completed and move on. So that takes us then, Rachel, I think, to integrated medium-term plan.
Thank you. So this is just hopefully a quick paper to give you an update on where we are on this year's plan. And the two things I just wanted to pull out, one since last board, I think just to note that the IMTP has been approved by the Minister, and also from Judith Paget. So in the kind of first paragraph there, we've got the accountability conditions which Judith wrote to Jason around. Those appear to be quite generic in terms of the sort of accountability conditions that most organisations in Wales would be required to work towards. Last year, if you remember, we did have some quite specific WAST related accountability conditions, so there aren't any very specific WAST ones this year. So we will continue to monitor those, obviously, particularly through F&P. And the other thing just to note, again, it's important, I think, from an assurance perspective, the Minister has got a series of priorities which she set out as part of the planning guidance last year, and in this paper is a kind of half-year outturn in terms of our input into towards those priorities and what we've done against what we said we were going to do in our IMTP. But broadly, you'll see some areas of some risk in terms of whether something's off track, and a more detailed paper went to F&P, which had the kind of the detail behind all of that. So we have a good discussion there on it. So there's nothing else particular to raise on that.
Good, thanks, Rachel. Any questions? It is Gary.
I just wanted to ask about dental services and 111. So this was discussed at length at the Vice Chair's meeting, and I suppose for the first time in a while I've had more of an understanding about the capacity issues and how that's emerging in different health boards. So obviously this is in here around referring people to community dental services, and so is that going to impact on our ability to meet those objectives because of the challenges in that area? I'm happy to take it offline if you think it's too detailed.
Just really briefly, the main thrust of the health board is 111. So some health boards have their own numbers and their own call centres for people who need urgent dental care. And the idea is that eventually that will all come across to 111. But in the same way as the national rollout, that would need to come with some resource for us. So we would need call handler, clinician capacity to be able to do that. So that's a programme of work that we are working on with the commissioners to do.
It was interesting, the last chairs meeting I attended this week, there was a fairly considerable discussion and some anxiety amongst the chairs of the health boards about dental services. It's very much on their radar because they understand that there is a lack of provision for dental practitioners in the community, and that there are a growing proportion of the population of Wales who have poor dental health. And people are presenting, I presume, to A&E as a consequence for emergency dental surgery, which could have been reduced had people had better ongoing care.
So I think it's really good actually to sort of hear about some of the external focus on dental. I mean, our team are connected into that. A lot of work's been done to understand and compare actually between health boards how our dental service is playing out. And it's interesting how for some we will provide some front end clinical review, but actually the disposition is the same. It is just simply a refer on to a health board service. And so we are, the team operationally are very actively engaged in terms of who we are commissioned to provide a dental service for versus who we aren't. We of course have a desire to be able to provide it once for Wales, but in a way that's also as consistent as possible. So there is a lot of active work going on around dental provision and how 111 plays into that.
If I can just come in off the back of that very briefly, just to flag that I think there is a really significant health inequality issue around the challenges we're having in dental care. I know anecdotally that a lot of people who need to receive NHS dental care have been completely cut off from anything preventative. So I don't know if those who have been to clinics have noticed recently signs saying you will not be invited for your routine appointment. If it's an emergency, call us. So I appreciate that this isn't primarily our concern, but where we do have the opportunity to feed in and perhaps to flag up the disparity between our interest in prevention and the absolute culling of a service. Again, we know that if we think about how health problems tend to develop with dental care, you could go from something that could have been managed quite well at a low level to suddenly a really quite bad systemic infection that then requires significant resource. So any opportunity we do have to influence that, I think would be really appreciated, because this disproportionately affects people living in poorer areas, people with fewer resources. So yeah, anything we can do while recognising that this isn't directly our responsibility.
So it's not anecdotal, is the first thing, Hannah. It's a really well made point, but it's not anecdotal. There's a mass of evidence behind what you just said. So it's the right thing to say, but I will send you some papers.
Thank you.
This is the new Penthrox for me. Preventable dental surgery in children is a massive indicator of health inequality, and there are some long-term public health preventative measures that could be implemented that would address that. The immediate problem is dental services are just not of the capacity to deal with the problem. So the issue for us is where do you send the volume? The issue for the wider health system is why are we inflicting preventable disease on 2 to 12-year-olds when we know that it's the greatest cause of surgery, unnecessary surgery. Anyway, sorry.
It's a choice financially, in the sense that there are private dental surgeries. You know, if one pays for private dental care, it is available. There are dentists operating, but it's not funded. So yeah.
Well, it was a major subject of discussion in the chairs. One of the things I thought was interesting, they were frustrated by the lack of data in terms of the level of need in the community.
Have to ask Kevin.
Exactly. No, that's right. That's right. But it's a bit hidden. Okay. Anybody else want any questions or points to Rachel on the IMTP paper? We're asked to note the contents. And I think it is interesting, the ministerial priorities. Last year, they were very specific. There were specifics on sickness, specifics on hearing close. We've had none of those, including this time at all. What conclusions you made? Made good progress.
Yes.
Made good progress.
Nothing
That's
for them
right.
to say.
That's right. Good. All right. Okay, thanks very much. Let us move on then to the next item, which is finance, I think. So, Chris, we've got a reasonable story with some risk, but some of the risks are
reducing risk, hopefully, yes.
Yeah.
So thank you, Chair. Just quickly to introduce the paper, which I'll take as read. And this does build on a presentation on the month 7 year-to-date position that was provided to the Finance Performance Committee last week, a slightly higher level presentation than normal because the time and fell on the day that we were submitting the final returns into government on month 7 to bring to the committee at that point the latest position and through to board today. Just a couple of updates, I suppose, of things that have happened in the last couple of months since we last met as a board that's impacted on our financial position and forecast in particular. We've undertaken, as we normally do, post month 6, month 7 time is when we sort of really try to nail forecasts across the NHS. Collectively, but in the organisation as well, even more sort of honing down what we think is the detailed profile of spend to continue through to the rest of the year, with there's obviously variation that we'll have to manage, particularly through the winter period, but looking to do that. And what's delayed that a little bit this year, as we know, has been some of the issues around fixing some of the funding levels that we've got. Clearly, we've had in the last couple of months and the last few weeks now more clarity around the Welsh Government position on funding issues across the NHS in Wales more generally and the knock-on impact that has on us. That's confirmed that on the back of the items that we submitted potentially that could have seen us needing to contribute an element to the NHS Wales wide deficit, being confirmed that that's not the case in the context of anything going further over and above what was in our savings plan already, which is good news for us organisationally. We have to deliver our plan, we have to balance, we have to make the savings that we said that we're going to make, etc. But nothing further at this stage is expected of us. And alongside that, some of the risks that we were holding previously, potentially around some of the balances remaining around pay award funding in year, as whilst we haven't received the cash for it yet, is effectively being removed. We've been given absolute clarity in that assurance of government that will be fully covered between now and the end of the financial year. So what that's allowed us to do is sort of, and across the NHS Wales, this has been a sort of steer from government based on that settlement in year that's been provided, is this sort of de-risking of positions, because within ours and all the rest of the organisations, we put a year-to-date position, we put a forecast position in, and then we put a load of risks that, if they materialised, add up to a big figure of what could be even worse than the reported positions, if you like, or the forecast positions. So the need to sort of chip away, if you like, at that worst case scenario and chip it down and de-risk the position in that way. So we've successfully been able to do that. And our position now is it's never risk-free, but it's from a financial perspective quite a low risk now in terms of us delivering what we need to deliver on going forward, and enabling us to do that. The one I do want to pull out is the outstanding amount that we were previously chasing down around funding in year for the increase in staffing that we've seen, and the position we've taken on that. So we have removed that from the risk of not receiving it. Now, we haven't removed it because we received it. We removed it on the basis that we're assuming now it's not been made available to us. It won't be received in year, and that's key in year. And yet we're still, hopefully from a positive position, able to still year to date and on a forecast basis balance our costs against the budget that we've got available to that. Now, we've referenced some elements of reasons why already today. We have sort of accepted that the funding that we get in a year is probably much more aligned to the cost that we're incurring. So we are still able to balance, because we do hold a small number of short-term vacancies against some of that overall establishment. Some of that then has got greater volatility in how we cover it. We've referenced also today that the take-up isn't completely 100% on some of the measures we put in place to offset those vacancies, particularly over time. And whilst that has impacts elsewhere financially, that has a financial in-year short-term benefit. We have held a contingency, as board members will know. We've held it longer in the year than we probably would have done, due to some of that uncertainty around whether we were going to have further income cut to contribute to the NHS Wales position. So we now got some of that to put against some of those costs that we would have otherwise funded from the 2 million. And we are doing well on our savings. We're overachieving. So there's some positivity obviously in year, and that what we're being very clear on is two things with that, is that back to the government sort of position, if you like, that's it. Certainly even given no matter what happens elsewhere in the NHS in Wales position for the winter, there can't be any expected further contribution from us from that, because we're doing all we can to deliver a balanced position within that. And the other point we're very clearly making that this is an 8-year position and ongoing. We will want to continue the negotiations, discussions with government and commissioners and others around the recurrent cost impacts of that increase, because we will look to get back up to establishment as soon as we can. So that was the main things that the paper sort of picks up, all the other usual delivery of year to date and of our statutory targets, and a brief update on our capital position. I will, at the next Finance Performance Committee, bring a bit more of an update through on a bit more detail on our capital, because I haven't sort of done so much on that, mainly because we've got a reduced capital programme this year, but I'm conscious we haven't really done that at F&P for a few meetings now, so I'll bring up a more detailed one through in the January meeting. But that was all I was going to make the check.
Great, thanks so much. I mean, good news as far as it goes for the moment anyway, and the outlook looks positive with some risks, but a reducing element of risk. So that's very good news. Any questions to Chris? We're asked to. Yes, Paul.
I wanted to ask about this 2 million, recognising we're not having that income this year, but certainly for next year, then if we retain that 100 extra full-time equivalent, that's another pressure for us for next year if we don't get non-recurrent funding again. So I just wonder, I can see how we are managing it this year, but I just wonder, does that give us concern for next year?
Yeah, well,
and subsequent years?
As I said, Paul, it's an in-year position. Our position with government and commissioners will be very clear that we will need the full 5.7 million next year, or if we don't, we'll have to do what we haven't necessarily had to do this year, but but it said earlier in the year we might have to do and would have to do going forward if it's not fully available again. Going forward, we would have to have an establishment agreed that's less than.
And I think the board needs to understand that and sign up to that, because there is a danger that our commissioners will see that we managed in year without the funding this year, and therefore we can do it again next year. So I think we need to be clear that that would give us added risk next year, financial risk.
That will be all fully picked up in the planning for next year, and will come through to board as part of the underlying financial plan and support next year's IMTP, etc. through January to March.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Thanks, Jim.
Any other comments? I didn't jog with you, but you wanted to mention anything in terms of AAA report from your committee?
No, it's the fact that about the full 5.7 not being given, and Chris gave us a good kind of background and that the fact that it is an in-year position, and again we delved in detail about our prudent planning and cost savings that we're making this year to get to a balanced position. And the intention then is for the next meeting in January is to then give us more of an update, but also then planning for next year and give us a bit more of a kind of a set plan of how we intend to continue with the savings for the following year, or putting in place now for that.
Any other questions? So we're asked to note the position and the forecast. Okay, thank you very much. Let's move on then. So I think over to you again, Rachel, now for the MIQBR.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chair. So I'll just pull out a couple of items from the SBAR. Happy to take any questions as well. So I think, as I have done in the last few meetings, just want to pull out some of the 111 performance. We spent a lot of time on some of the EMS services and the pressures there, so I won't mention those. But in terms of 111, again, we've had a really good month where abandonment rates are lower than 5% for the third month in a row. Improvements in the percentage of patients who have their call answered within 60 seconds. So that, as a patient experience, is a very, very different picture to what it was previously. And of course, as Stephen alluded to earlier, I think at the point that he was ringing last year, there were difficulties in terms of how quickly 111 was able to respond. So that's a good story in terms of a turnaround. And also our clinicians are ringing back within the timescales that we kind of agree in terms of those priority calls. So really positive things there. And as I've said before, it is to do with the team, operation clinical teams there who are working so hard at making, overturning every stone, trying to find ways of making improvements in every part of that service. So a big thank you to them for that. So the other thing I was going to raise, in terms of our quality indicators, was a new quality indicator which we've been talking about for a while, and that's the call to door times for stroke and STEMI patients. So we have been talking about this for quite a while in terms of being able to get that data correct, and now reporting. So this is the first time of reporting this. So you'll see there that call to hospital door times of 2 hours 20 for stroke patients, 2 hours 30 for STEMI, and clearly that's too long, and is a symptom of the response times that we see across all of our amber category patients, all of our patients, but at least it starts to give us a baseline and an understanding, and we can add that into the data from hospitals where they're clear about the length of time it takes their patients, these patients, to get through to the next stage of their care within the hospital arena. So really pleased that they're here, but knowing that there's a lot more to do on that. The other thing I just wanted to raise in terms of the quality quadrant in terms of the indicators was the complaint response times. We've seen some improvements over a couple of months, but that dropped back to 21% in October. And I know we've talked about the resources that we're putting into that team. So there is work going on now to try and support that team to manage the huge workload. And again, the story from Stephen, that it brings, again, there's so many aspects, isn't it, of his story. in his family story that comes through in some of this data, which is great. So I think those are probably the kind of main things that I wanted to pull out that we haven't picked up then perhaps in some of the other. And I don't know whether there was anything from a staff perspective. We've done better on sickness, which is a positive. Still a way to go and still some risks there, I know, but happy to take any questions then if there's any issues of detail.
Okay, grand. So Jason, you want to come in? Do you want to go first? Then
Thanks. As you may well bring in, I wanted to take us to 25, if I can, slide 25, which talks about numbers of respect and resolutions of disciplinary cases across the workforce. There's often, I just want to, I suppose, draw this out for the board. I know it's considered, Paul, at People and Culture regularly, People and Culture Committee, but I think this is an important one to draw out. So there's often a myth. I'm going to exaggerate slightly for effect. There are hundreds of people across the organisation that are subject to disciplinary action. That simply isn't borne out by the numbers. It's just not true. And indeed, recent benchmarking, Angie, that you've been able to access from other trusts across England indicates that we are probably in a at least middle of the pack position, if not potentially favourable in terms of the size of our organisation and the volume of cases which we see. So I don't know if you just wanted to say a bit more about that.
Yeah, happy to do that. And I was going to bring it up, so thank you, Jason. This is the first time that we've actually reflected this in the NPR, but just for the board's attention and for colleagues listening perhaps online, we've really made a commitment this year around our cultural metrics to make sure that these are being discussed in a range of forums, not just People and Culture Committee, but also our executive leadership team. We don't just look at these ones, we also look at potential freedom to speak up, we look at equality and diversity as well. But as Jason said, we did some benchmarking, and whilst there is a caution around this because potentially, particularly on respect and resolution, there could be underreporting, it was reassuring to hear from colleagues across the ambulance sector that we have a reasonable, for this size of organisation, amount of cases. The bigger issue for us is the compassion with which we're responding to those, the speed with which we're responding to those, and again, working in partnership with our trade union colleagues, making sure that we are really trying to address issues at an informal level wherever we can, but also taking appropriate action with the more serious issues. So it's good to see it on here, and it's to give that level of reassurance that this is very much an area of focus for the organisation.
Thanks, Jason. Thanks, Angie. Yes, Hannah.
So a quick question for Angie and then a question about ambulance care, if that's okay. So I'm looking at the percentage of applicants shortlisted from underrepresented groups and can see that there's quite significant fluctuation in terms of the dates that we've got. I wondered if any more detailed analysis had been done around what the barriers are between application and shortlisting, and equally what the factors are that determine eventual success or not, and if there's anything that we've got to learn that we could do differently to support success or to equip candidates to demonstrate their success.
Yeah, happy to share that, Hannah, and I would say this is part of the key piece of sort of project work that we're doing as part of our People and Culture Plan this year, and it's good to see this data visibly for the first time again.
Yes, it's important.
And one those key focuses are we going back to individuals in terms of assessing, first of all, we're doing some work up front about why we're not getting people actually to apply in the first place in terms of some of our roles, but also then trying to really unpick, as you say, those why are we losing people at particular hurdles? Is it qualification categories? Is it something else? The next layer of this is, so how does that translate into how many actual colleagues are appointed?
Yeah.
So again, we will see that next layer of sort of granularity on this coming through. But to give you a level of reassurance, my expectation is that we will take this back to People and Culture Committee as one of our sort of key deliverables at the end of the year to see how we're doing. But this will be a long-term commitment in terms of that real scrutiny around how can we improve our representation.
Brilliant, thank you. I look forward to seeing more of that at People and Culture.
Yeah, because we looked at this not last meeting, the meeting before, and we asked for further information around that because it looked as if applications were being received and then they were failing at shortlisting. and didn't get to interview. So we've asked for that detail to come back to
I think,
people.
yes, I think that's perhaps what was in my mind. So
Yeah.
thank you. And then my second question, which is on a completely different topic, is I'm having a look at the ambulance care indicators. So actually just on the slide below, and looking at the proportion of journeys cancelled on the day. And by far the greatest reason for that given is that patients were not located. While that figure has improved slightly, in the sense that it's decreased slightly this in October compared with September, I just wanted to know a little bit more really about what's being done to move that forward more substantially, because I know on the overall metric right at the beginning, and let me just make sure I'm sharing this in a way that's accurate, we'd got the we were looking at a 2-year. So yeah, so the net on the day cancellation, the 2-year average was 19.3%, and so while we have reduced from 20.2 in September to 19.4 in October, we're not really making much progress from a bigger picture perspective, it looks like, from these figures. So I just wondered if you could give a bit more information on what work is being done to tackle the causes of late cancellations, which therefore mean we're not able to use our crews as effectively as we would wish to.
You want to answer now, or is it something you want to come back to?
I think, I mean, there's a couple of things. I can say, but I think mainly I'm going to have to take this one on notice. It's quite a detailed question. But there are, and there would be desires to bring about a shift in that. And I think the greatest enabler to this would be technology, which would be a mechanism through which it's easier for service users to see their transport. And have an easier mechanism to communicate directly with us. Now, recognising that more often than not we have a particular demographic in terms of user of these services, but there would definitely be technical solutions. We have tried things like phoning ahead. That requires capacity to do that. So we have attempted that. The cancellations, of course, are not always from the patients. They could also be from health boards themselves. So it's, but to get into more detail than that, I'd have to take that one on notice, Chair.
You happy with that, Hannah? Take that offline. Brad, any other comments, questions? Yes, Annie.
Yeah, and it's on slide 17 of the MRQPR, and it goes back to the point I was making before about the number of patients who cancelled following the 999 calling. You can see in fairly starkly set out on that slide there with the sheer volume of patients that are cancelled. So we just wanted to join the dots from the previous conversation as to where it appears in the MRQPR.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, I think that's probably it. We asked to receive the report, provide sufficient assurance, information scrutiny assurance required. Any further remedial actions, I think we're probably content with it as it rests. And we've given it a big airing, not only here, but in the previous discussion. So happy with that, we'll take that as completed. And I think then, Trish, we're over to you for an amendment to standing orders, which relates to changes of personnel and type.
Yes, thanks, Chair. Fairly straightforward, hopefully, amendment to the scheme of reservation and delegation, just to indicate that medical director responsibilities will primarily now be for the Executive Director of Paramedicine from the 1st of January. So there's a raft of changes there that are marked up in Table A in the annex for approval, as I say, with effect from the 1st of January. And then there's another minor amendment that didn't flow through from the Welsh Government changes that I brought in September. It's just to reflect that we have 7 days both to send papers out and also to put them up on the public website. That takes effect immediately. Thanks.
Okay, and I guess we're just after note that.
Approval for
Oh,
those,
that's an approval,
please.
right. Okay, sorry. Yes, we are indeed. So are we happy to approve the change of those words? Yes. Okay, thank you very much. Right, we have, back on time, isn't that amazing? So, board committee reports. Let's run through those. Academic Partnership Committee. So, Hannah, do you want to give us a run through of your committee?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. So you've got the AAA report. Thanks to Trish and team for preparing that for us as usual. I'm going to take the overview as read, but I'd like to highlight 3 of our advise items, just for your notice, really. So the first thing was that we had a really interesting presentation from Joe Kelser, who of course heads up our learning team, about interprofessional simulation-based education and training. And what that essentially means, so interprofessional is that we're bringing people together from across the NHS and social care. So really, really positive, seeing people coming together for this mandatory training. So this is what would have been the old CPD, so in-service training, but doing that together, and simulation-based, working through particular kind of scenarios. And this is a more practical and kind of focused and targeted approach to training that was really warmly received. And I think particularly those that had completed the old type of training were very quick to say how much more relevant and more enjoyable this was, as an activity that they of course have to complete a certain amount each year. So wanted to sort of flag that up as a piece of positive work that's going on. It's going to be the basis of a research paper. This is in train at the moment. So once that's gone through peer review, it will be published, with the hope that this approach can then be rolled out to a wider audience. So a real success there, both in terms of the quality of our learning. And I know we use this phrase, the democratization of learning, but really thinking about how do we make learning accessible and meaningful to the full range of our colleagues, some of whom have really high levels of professional education and qualification, some of which have taken vocational pathways and are often put off by very, very formal types of learning. And so this is a really positive example of high quality training, but delivered in a way that's accessible. And it's also a positive from a research perspective, because this is an example of innovation that we're then sharing and publishing, so that others can follow suit. The second thing to highlight is that our focus at the moment, as we oversee our work towards university trust status, is the recruitment of our new non-exec director colleague. So we're looking for someone, as you'll recall, with an academic, commercial or innovation background. We've had applicants for that, and we're looking forward to interviewing them in December. So just to assure you really that that's going on, and we're looking forward to seeing who we've had come through there. And then finally to say we were pleased to welcome Johnny as our new Director of Digital Services. We are enjoying an increasingly close relationship between Academic Partnerships Committee and the Digital Directorate, recognising the huge role that our digital colleagues have in a lot of the innovation work that we want to see. And also wanted to take this opportunity to formally record the committee's thanks to Leanne Smith, who held the interim role and started that relationship, and just to really recognise her work and to extend our thanks. So thanks to all committee members for their ongoing work, particularly the commitment to learning and reflection. So we're working really hard together to make sure that we're as effective as we can be as a committee. So many thanks to everyone. And if anyone ever wants to know more about what we do or wants any more detail, come and find me. I'm happy to talk about it.
Thanks, Hannah. Oh no, you're looking at me as though you wanted to come in. You sure? We're all looking at you now. Okay, thanks. Thanks very much, Hannah. I think, as somebody who had a background as doctors years ago, also back in the dark ages in a kind of education and training capacity, I have to say, I think we're very fortunate to have Joe and the Matrix team and the work that's going on in training. We are innovative, and we have a huge workforce, many of whom require what used to be called the mandatory training, the WAST training now, I think. We are blessed, actually, in that area, I think. Okay, so Kevin, you're going to take the question report on Veterans' behalf.
So two reports on in the papers, the 2023 annual mental health and dementia report, received and discussed at the committee, and I think we should acknowledge the efforts of the mental health team and the dementia team in all of that work. It's a really good piece of work that we commended in the committee. And the infection prevention control report there, as it was omitted in August. Look, we've had a go at 223 and 224 here today, as always. Remains very high on the agenda of Quest. And, you know, as I said earlier, the conversation around where does mitigation stop in terms of the severity of the risk. We're not comfortable going anywhere away from where we are at the moment. A couple of things to highlight. The upward trend in return of spontaneous circulation, consequent of cardiac arrest, really a really good trajectory. And I think, you know, the implementation of CHARU, good SAM app, all that sort of good community stuff, as well as the expertise to follow up, is really welcome. PTR, putting things right team, you know, the enhancements there clearly will impact on the response and relationship with the people we serve. And Stephen's example earlier is something that I suspect will benefit from that. And again, Liam outlined our trajectory in meeting the requirements of the duty of candour and duty of quality legislation. They're the higher level things that we discussed. The rest is pretty routine, but as I say, we've done 223 and 224 here today, as always.
Good, thank you very much, Kevin. Any questions or comments, Liam?
I may, Chair, just one footnote to Kevin's report, which is to highlight that we have started to bring through quality impact assessments into the committee structure. So in respect to the duty of quality, it's helpful just to acknowledge that here, that the duty of quality is informing decision making. It's now got a governance trail that comes through from service proposition and change proposition through into our clinical quality and governance group, and where appropriate into executives and to our Quest committee. So really important part of the duty of quality compliance.
Good, thank you very much. And the two reports are appended in all the papers, and that's the report on mental health and infection prevention, which we are just required to acknowledge, therefore, our information. All right, so we can move on then to the next one, which is finance and performance. So, Joe, do you want to comment on your committee?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. We've already touched on some of these as part of the papers that were presented by Chris and Rachel. So the main one was with regards to the funding for the 100 working full-time roles. So yeah, we've got a position for this year, and then yeah, we're making plans. Chris, we're making plans for the future of how we can ensure we do get that money. We also then had a good discussion about the forecasting, which we mentioned earlier, about the winter forecasting, and the committee were mindful that actually we're doing everything we can. Bear in mind, we appreciate the difficult position going forward, and generally with regards to the finance, we were given assurance that all savings are being made, and we're on track with that. And then finally, with some of the positives with the monthly INTP, the 111, I know Rachel mentioned earlier, but again, the committee was pleased to see that the call responses there, we're on a continuing upward trend of meeting the targets, which is good and acknowledged with all the hard work that's been going on behind the scenes. Thank you, Chair.
Good, thanks, Jogo. Any questions to Jogo? There is a report which is included for our information, which is about business continuity. It's not a report for approval, but it's a report for noting, which we do. Thank you very much. So people and culture.
Oh, thanks, Chair. As we only had the meeting last week, I'll give a verbal report about what generally happened at the meeting, but there are two elements for approval in the separate AAA report. One is the health and safety policy, which we discussed, and there's the hard work that's gone into developing that policy, and it's now in place, so the board's asked to approve that policy. And the other one is Speaking Up Safely framework, which the People and Culture Committee agreed to adopt. It's a all Wales framework. So if we could have approval for those two, please. In terms of the meeting itself, it was a hybrid meeting, which worked out quite well, actually, despite initial concerns that it may not. We looked at the issues around staff survey. I think there's still a week left, Angie.
Yeah.
We're at the point of the meeting 19.4%, which was better than some of the health boards, but not as good as some other trusts. So we wanted to encourage people to continue to contribute to the NHS survey. It is important we do listen to it and take note of what's said. We acknowledged, as you said earlier, Jason, the passing of Michelle Perry, and passed our condolences to her family and colleagues. We talked about the volunteer conferences, Lee, and the success of them, and recognised that. And we saw some innovative work in terms of 111 conversations in 111, and the feedback that was provided. So we thought, well, can we expand that, recognising it's challenging, but we thought that that was a worthwhile thing to do in terms of getting staff feedback. We didn't have a patient staff story because the scheduled staff story had been to board previously. So Angie gave us a quick overview of some of the feedback from the Chief Exec's roadshows, particularly on how staff were feeling, and I think we've picked this up throughout the meeting, but workload was clearly an issue for our staff, as well as poor cultural conditions. So we need to explore that a little more to find out what does that mean. And later on we discussed the pulse survey that we've put out recently, which again looks at those cultural issues. We felt that the roadshows were really appreciated. We did have a discussion about why some people weren't attending the roadshows, and that will be brought back into the evaluation that Jason has asked for in terms of feedback on the Chief Exec's roadshows. We had a significant number of questions. Some were discussed at the meetings themselves, and others will follow through. The people and culture elements of the IMTP for next year was discussed. That it was far too long. There were too many. It was very ambitious. We recognised the ambition and the enthusiasm, but we felt that it needed to be pulled back a little. The Speaking Up Safely framework, as I've said, we discussed that and we adopted that as a committee and asked for the board to approve it. We looked at the cultural review tool that has been produced for managers in order to help them consider the culture within their teams, and we thought that was really helpful and practical. In terms of the Assure, we looked at the engagement framework that Estelle brought forward and said, recognising that things have changed, it was quite narrow before in terms of what we were engaging on. We want to broaden that, so we recognise that that framework will need to be reviewed, and we'll bring that back to the next meeting. We had some assurance regarding registration and revalidation. One of the roles of the committee is to ensure that we've got processes in place for professional registration and validation, and we were assured by that report that Andy presented on behalf of the HCP and the Nursing and Midwifery Council. The workforce audit, there was an audit report that will come to audit committee next week, which gave us assurance in terms of our approach to workforce planning. And we looked at the metrics on people and culture, which is now being integrated into the MIQPR. We talked earlier about the relationship with trade unions, and we recognise that whilst there's tricky issues that we are dealing with in partnership, actually there was a lot of good work being done, and I think again that's borne out by some of the metrics that we've seen earlier. We were pleased to see that the Corporate Partnership Forum has now been stood up, so that again will give us another insight into partnership working across the organisation. We recognise the health and safety, the completely different culture within the health and safety agenda, and the work that the teams had done, and congratulated them on that. And then we looked at the audit tracker and recognised that quite a few were closed in the quarter. We've got no 21-22 recommendations now outstanding. And again, we looked at the senior paramedic audit. And again, I think that's going to audit committee next week, and that gives reasonable assurance as well. We've talked about the risks, particularly the 199 in terms of health and safety, and looking at all the factors that were improvements that have been made in health and safety in terms of its policy, how it's operating, its engagement with operational staff. We felt that risks should be reduced. There were no new risks identified, and we will meet in January.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul, very much. Any questions to Paul? The two papers or reports that we were asked to actually ratify as a health and safety policy and the speaking up. I was educated in a conversation with our ever knowful board secretary, who explained to me the difference, subtle it is, between approval and ratification. Apparently you have approved it, so we need to ratify your approval. So I'm just looking around to make sure that we are happy to ratify the approval that has been done elsewhere. I guess we are. Good. Okay, thank you very much.
Chairman, just a quick
Yes.
question. You mentioned something about cultural issues. You said, can you just elaborate on that? I didn't quite understand what you were getting at.
Yeah, as part of the chief exec's, Angie might want to talk to this, but as part of the chief exec roadshows, people were asked how they felt and what was good and bad about the organisation. I don't know if you want to say any more.
Yes, happy to. Sorry, Martin. So we asked the question and it was anonymous and people responded, and quite a lot of the responses we had were around workload, handover, delays, challenges in terms of cultural conditions. So it was relatively high level feedback that we had from the roadshows, but people were willing to tell us that these were some of their challenges at the moment. And again, it just builds on the work we're doing more generally around actually trying to really focus on the lived experience for colleagues on a daily basis. But that's where it came from.
And I think one of the things that we recognise as a committee, the Pulse survey, which looks at elements of that, might give us more information about what that actually means, because it's a broad heading, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. That's why I asked.
Yeah, so we've asked for a bit more detail,
I
which should come through the Pulse survey for the next meeting.
Good, thanks very much, Kevin.
Just a small comment, really. Just I think it's right to feedback. There was an innovative table produced. It's called the Qs. It's the Cultural Early Warning Score, which was presented to the committee, which has been developed, and it's like a scorecard for managers to actually get a temperature of what their culture is within their department. It's really worth having a look at. I've got to say credit where it's due, because it's a really good piece of work.
That's a very good point. Thanks, Damon. Yes, we had a presentation on the cultural tool that I talked about, and it's been used as news, which is what clinicians use, but it's been called Qs, and it's a scorecard basically, and you do high, medium, and low risk, and you start off by looking at a baseline. It's a very good. I think it would probably be worth sharing it.
Yeah, I'm very happy to share it, and we've developed it in-house, and obviously across the NHS in Wales there is genuine interest in whether it actually works, so we're piloting it, but also with Andy's team looking at whether this is a research piece of work as well that we can feed into. It is really just trying to do what you've just talked about, Martin, which is we need more information to understand exactly what's behind, perhaps sort of more generic. Actually, I'm not happy in work. It's really trying to get to the bottom of that, but very happy to share it more broadly.
I think from memory, it's measuring things like sickness and performance reviews and training, mandatory
Turnover,
training,
relationships. It's a really broad, and it's so happy to share it.
Corporate health matters. Good. Okay. Thanks very much. Trish just reminded me we actually have had a sequence of all the committees meeting over the last couple of months. So a huge amount of work has gone on over the last 8 weeks or so in the committees. So thanks to the teams behind the scenes who put it all together, to Alex and Trish and all the others, to all the people who support it, and of course to the team members themselves. There's a lot of work in the committees, as we know, and it is a lot to get through. So thank you for everybody. Okay, we have some consent items which were there for our information. I'm going to take those all as read, if I may, conscious of time. So I think that takes us pretty much to the end of the meeting. We do have a couple of general AOBs. Did mention at the beginning, mention it again, that this is Kevin's last board member as vice chair, not last board member, I underline, but last board member as vice chair. And we thank you very much, Kevin, for your contributions as vice chair, which has extended longer than you had anticipated. So we thank you very much for that, and welcome Kerry to the interim vice chair as the 1st of January. The other thing we need to recognise today is that it is Brendan's last outing at a board, not last outing totally, because we have board development in December, so we shall be able to seriously embarrass you there. But I think we'll just we'll tease you a little bit by embarrassing you now by saying that for me, thank you very much. I've only worked with you for a year, but I've really appreciated your presence here. I think that it is noticeable that, I mean, when everybody on this board speaks, everybody listens, but I think particularly that when you speak, I think everybody really does listen. And certainly I recognise that you speak with authority and with a huge amount of experience across the system, obviously as a medic, but also somebody who's worked, in the system, sort of hands-off patients as hands-on patients in the past. So I've very much respected your contributions and valued them, and will miss your contributions. You will be missed, I'm sure. Jason, if you'd like to say a few words now, and then we'll save the really embarrassing bits to December.
Thanks, Chairman. So we will save the really embarrassing bit and gifts, Brendan, to our last meeting with you in December. But I mean, formally in your last public board meeting from me, can I just say thank you? You've got, on behalf of the service, you've got 4 decades worth of service in the NHS, nearly a decade here, 9 years, I think, here in WAST. And there are some notable achievements in the last 9 years that you've spearheaded. Probably the most significant, not only for us, but arguably for the rest of the sector across the UK, was the move to the clinical response model, which of course we know that others across the rest of the UK have subsequently followed in their own way. So I think we should not, we should not underestimate the significance of your influence to patient care and patient safety here in Wales, but across the rest of the UK too. So from me, thank you for the last 5 years in supporting me since I joined in 2018. Thank you for your nearly a decade here in the ambulance sector, but of course most importantly for 4 decades of public service and to patients across Wales. Stalwart of the NHS. Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll just invite you to say a few words then.
Well, I wasn't expecting to, but yeah, I would say, I think I've been very fortunate in my career that I've had the opportunity to have several interesting, stimulating, challenging jobs. But I would say that I am very fortunate in that I'm finishing my career in the job that I think I have enjoyed the most, in a very vibrant organisation, recognising the challenges. I think we've got a fantastic team in WAST, and while I appreciate that the change in the clinical model is probably a standout feature, I'm probably most happy about the fact that over the last few years we've been able to develop clinical leadership within WAST at the same time that the professionalism has been driven forward in the paramedics profession. And I'm absolutely confident now that we are at a point where I can stand back and we have excellent clinical leaders to drive the organisation forward to the next stage, which certainly wasn't the situation when I arrived 9 years ago. So yeah, I think the combination of the expertise at board level and the clinical leadership that we now have in place probably puts this organisation in a better position than any other ambulance service I've seen across the UK to take forward the work over the next few years, which is going to be challenging, but hopefully ultimately will be rewarding as well.
Thank you, Brendan. Thank you very much. Well, on that note, we'll close the meeting. Thank you very much. It just remains for us to resolve to exclude members of the press and the public from this meeting, so that we move into the private sector for a couple of small commercial items to discuss after lunch. So we'll take a lunch break now. If we can get back by 1 o'clock, if we can be back by here in 1, it's only 25 minutes, but if we could, that would be great. And we will start as soon as we are back from 1 o'clock onwards. Thank you very much.